Hey everyone, welcome back. I've got the Minecraft world loaded up, some smooth gameplay rolling, and a story today that's going to make your blood boil in all the right ways. We're talking about apologies that come with terms and conditions attached, like some kind of emotional contract you never agreed to sign. Big shout out to everyone who's been watching, liking, and dropping comments. Seriously, you all are the reason this channel keeps growing. If you've been enjoying the content, hit that subscribe button and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. We're so close, and I'd love for you to be part of that milestone. Alright, so picture this. You're in a relationship where boundaries have been crossed, repeatedly, and finally your partner comes to you ready to apologize. You're actually willing to forgive, to move forward, to rebuild. But then they hand you a list, an actual list of conditions you have to meet before their apology counts. After months of what I can only describe as walking on eggshells, things finally came to a head. We'd had arguments before, sure, but this one was different. This time, my partner had crossed every single boundary we'd spent years establishing together. I'm talking about the non-negotiables, the things we'd both agreed were deal breakers. Privacy boundaries, respect boundaries, basic human decency boundaries. All of it, just trampled over in one spectacular meltdown. The fight itself was brutal. Voices were raised, things were said that couldn't be unsaid, and by the end of it, I genuinely wasn't sure if we were even still together. I spent 3 days sleeping on the couch, barely speaking to them except for the absolutely necessary exchanges. The apartment felt like a minefield. Every room held the potential for another explosion. So I just kept my head down and waited. Then, on the fourth day, they came to me. I was sitting in the living room, mindlessly scrolling through my phone and trying to pretend everything was fine, when they walked in and sat down across from me. Their face had that serious, vulnerable look that usually preceded big conversations. My first thought was relief. Finally, we were going to talk this through like adults. Finally, they were going to acknowledge what they'd done, and we could start the process of actually fixing things. They started with the words I'd been waiting to hear. I'm sorry. Two simple words that should have been the beginning of healing. I felt my shoulders relax slightly. I was ready to meet them halfway. I was ready to forgive and move forward because despite everything, I still loved this person. I still believed we could work through it. But that wasn't even the worst part. They reached into their pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. An actual physical piece of paper, folded neatly in half. They unfolded it and smoothed it out on the coffee table between us. I leaned forward, confused, trying to see what it was. That's when I realized it was a list. A numbered, itemized list written in their handwriting. I've been thinking about everything, they said, and I want to apologize, but I think for us to move forward, we need to be on the same page about some things. I picked up the paper, and what I read made my stomach drop. Point number 1. I'm sorry for what happened, but I need you to acknowledge that you overreacted and made the situation worse than it needed to be. Point number 2. I'm sorry, but you need to agree to stop bringing up my past mistakes in future arguments. Point number 3. I'm sorry, but you have to promise never to discuss our private arguments with your friends again. There were 7 points total, 7 conditions attached to their apology. Each one was phrased the same way, starting with I'm sorry, but, and then immediately pivoting to something I needed to do, something I needed to change, something I needed to promise. I just sat there staring at this piece of paper, trying to process what I was looking at. This wasn't an apology. This was a negotiation. This was a contract they expected me to sign, except instead of my signature, they wanted my silence, my compliance, my agreement that I was somehow equally at fault for their behavior. The one about my friends particularly stung. After the initial fight, I'd called my best friend because I was devastated and needed someone to talk to. Apparently, that was now being weaponized against me. They wanted me to promise that whatever happened between us would stay between us, which really meant whatever they did to me couldn't be shared with anyone who might actually validate my feelings or tell me I deserve better. So, they said, watching me read, if you can agree to these things, then we can put this behind us and move on. I looked up from the paper and just stared at them. You're serious right now? Completely serious. I think these are fair boundaries for both of us. Boundaries. They were calling these conditions boundaries. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive in a twisted way. They'd violated every actual boundary we had, And now they were reframing their demands as some kind of mutual agreement about respect. "These aren't boundaries," I said slowly. "These are conditions. You're not apologizing. You're trying to control how I respond to your apology." They got defensive immediately. "I knew you'd react like this. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're always so focused on being right that you can't see when someone is trying to meet you halfway." Meet me halfway, as if presenting someone with a list of demands was meeting them anywhere except at the point of complete capitulation. And here's where it gets absurd. They actually expected me to go through the list point by point and negotiate each item. When I refused to engage with it at all, when I told them that an apology with conditions isn't an apology, they started accusing me of being unwilling to work on the relationship. I was being stubborn. I was being unforgiving. I was holding grudges. According to them, my refusal to agree to their terms was proof that I'd never really wanted to resolve anything in the first place. "So you're just going to throw away everything we've built because you can't compromise?" they asked, and I could hear the manipulation dripping from every word. They were trying to make this my fault. They were trying to flip the script so that my refusal to accept a conditional apology became the reason our relationship was failing. I looked at them, really looked at them, and saw clearly for the first time in months. This person wasn't going to change. This person didn't think they'd done anything wrong. They'd written out this list because they genuinely believed that their apology should come with requirements, that saying sorry meant I owed them something in return. "I'm not doing this," I said, standing up. "I'm not signing your emotional contract." That's when they really lost it. They started yelling about how I was impossible to please, how nothing was ever good enough for me, how they'd tried to apologize and I'd thrown it back in their face. The person who'd crossed every boundary was now furious that I wouldn't accept their terms for apologizing about it. I walked into the bedroom and started packing a bag. I could hear them following me, still talking, still trying to convince me that I was the unreasonable one. Every piece of clothing I folded, every item I put into my overnight bag, they had another justification, another reason why I was wrong. "Where are you even going to go?" they demanded. "Literally anywhere else," I said. They stood in the doorway watching me pack, and I could see the exact moment they realized I was actually leaving. Their whole demeanor shifted. Suddenly they were apologetic again, but this time without the list. "Wait, let's talk about this. I didn't mean for it to come across that way. Maybe I worded things wrong." But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was watching them try to rewrite what had just happened in real time. They were already trying to gaslight me about the list, suggesting that maybe I'd misunderstood their intentions, that maybe I was being too sensitive about the wording. I zipped up my bag and walked past them. I crashed at my friend's place that night. The same friend they'd wanted me to promise I'd never talk to about our problems. I told her everything. I showed her a photo I'd taken of the list before I left. Her reaction was immediate and visceral. "This is manipulation," she said. "This is textbook emotional manipulation." And she was right. In trying to control the terms of their own apology, my partner had revealed exactly who they were. Someone who believed that even when they were wrong, they should still be in control. Someone who thought sorry should come with fine print. I never went back. I arranged to get my stuff when they weren't home. They sent me dozens of texts over the following weeks, alternating between begging me to come back and accusing me of being cruel and unforgiving. They never once acknowledged that their conditional apology was the problem. In their mind, they'd tried to make things right and I'd rejected them. The relationship ended not with their initial betrayal during that first fight, not even with the boundary violations that led to it, but with their complete inability to take accountability without attaching strings. They couldn't just be sorry. They needed to be sorry with conditions, with requirements, with a framework that still positioned them as the one in control. Looking back now, that list was probably the best thing that could have happened. It was like they'd accidentally handed me a document that proved exactly why I needed to leave. They'd literally written out all the ways they planned to continue manipulating me, thinking I'd just agree to it. Some people will do anything except actually apologize. They'll write lists, they'll create conditions, they'll turn their own wrongdoing into a negotiation where somehow you end up being the one who needs to compromise. And the moment you refuse to play along, you become the villain in their story. I walked away from that relationship understanding something crucial. An apology that comes with terms and conditions isn't an apology at all. It's just another way of maintaining control while pretending to make amends. Real remorse doesn't require you to sign anything, literal or metaphorical. It doesn't come with a list of things you need to do in exchange for someone's regret. They taught me that sometimes the most revealing thing about a person isn't how they treat you when things are good, but what they think counts as making things right when they're not. But conditional apologies weren't the only manipulation tactic out there. Because sometimes the therapy room itself becomes the trap. My partner suggested couples therapy after months of tension, and honestly, I was relieved. We'd been struggling to communicate, constantly talking past each other, and I thought maybe a professional could help us get back on track. I'd never done therapy before, but I was willing to try anything at that point. So when they sent me the address and time, I didn't think twice. I just showed up ready to do the work. I walked into this cozy little office building, found the suite number, and stepped inside expecting to see a therapist waiting room. Maybe some calming artwork, a few magazines, that generic peaceful aesthetic you see in every counseling office. Instead, I found my partner's parents sitting on a couch. Then I noticed my partner's younger sibling in one of the chairs, and their best friend leaning against the wall. All of them turned to look at me with these warm, welcoming smiles, like this was the most normal thing in the world. My first thought was that I'd walked into the wrong room, but then my partner stood up and said, "Hey, you made it. Come sit down." And I just stood there in the doorway, completely frozen, trying to process what I was seeing. This was supposed to be couples therapy, just the two of us and a neutral professional. So why did it look like a family reunion? Before I could ask what was going on, a woman I'd never seen before walked in from a side door and introduced herself. She was bubbly, overly friendly, and immediately started talking about how excited she was to facilitate this session. She didn't introduce herself as a therapist. She called herself a life coach. I later found out she was a family friend with some online certification she'd gotten in like 6 weeks. Not a licensed therapist, not a counselor, just someone my partner's family trusted to run this little intervention. I should have left right then. Every instinct in my body was screaming that this was wrong, but I was so confused and caught off guard that I just sat down, still trying to figure out what kind of therapy session involves your partner's entire inner circle. The life coach started with some generic opening about creating a safe space for honest communication. And I remember thinking, safe for who? Because I was already outnumbered 6-1. Then came the breaking point. The life coach turned to my partner's mum and said, "Why don't you start by sharing some of your concerns?" And that's when I realized this wasn't therapy. It was a coordinated attack. My partner's mum launched into this whole speech about how worried she'd been about me, how I was controlling and didn't let my partner make their own decisions, how I isolated them from their family. I sat there, jaw on the floor, because none of that was true. I'd actively encouraged my partner to spend time with their family. I'd never once tried to control anything, but she kept going. She had examples ready. Apparently, the time I suggested we skip a family dinner because I had a work deadline was me being manipulative. The time I asked my partner to set boundaries with their mum about dropping by unannounced was me trying to isolate them. Every normal relationship conversation had been twisted into evidence of my supposed control issues. Then my partner's sibling jumped in. They said I was unsupportive because I didn't attend every single family event. Their best friend said I was jealous and possessive because I'd once mentioned feeling left out when my partner made plans without telling me. And my partner? They just sat there nodding along, occasionally adding their own examples to the pile. It was like they'd rehearsed this. Every time I tried to defend myself, the life coach would cut me off. She'd say things like, "I'm hearing a lot of defensiveness right now, and that's exactly what we're talking about." Or, "Can you see how your reaction is proving their point?" It was a trap. If I stayed silent, I was admitting guilt. If I spoke up, I was being defensive and difficult. There was no winning. This is where patience finally snapped. About an hour into this nightmare, my partner's dad decided to weigh in. He'd been quiet up until that point, just watching with his arms crossed. But then he leaned forward and said, "You know, I never thought you were right for them. From day one, I saw the red flags." And something in me just broke. Not in a dramatic, explosive way, more like a quiet realization that I was done. Completely done. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and headed for the door. The life coach tried to stop me, saying we were making real progress, and I just needed to stay open to feedback. My partner looked genuinely confused, like they couldn't understand why I was upset. Their mom actually said, "See, this is exactly the kind of immature behavior we're talking about." I didn't yell. I didn't slam the door. I just left. I walked out of that office, got in my car, and drove home in complete silence, trying to process what had just happened. They'd planned this for who knows how long. They'd coordinated schedules, found a fake therapist, prepared their talking points, and used the promise of couples therapy to lure me into an ambush. The betrayal wasn't just in what they said, it was in the calculated deception of the whole setup. You almost have to admire the audacity. Later that night, my partner texted me. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, ambushing someone with their entire family wasn't appropriate. No, they were confused. They said, "I don't understand why you're overreacting. Those are people who care about you. We were just trying to help." And that's when I knew the relationship was truly over. Because if they genuinely believed that what happened was helpful, we were living in completely different realities. I tried to explain over text why it was messed up. How therapy is supposed to be a neutral space with a licensed professional, not a staged intervention with your family and friends. How it felt like a betrayal to walk into what I thought was couples counseling and find myself outnumbered and attacked. But every message I sent was met with the same response. I was being too sensitive. I was overreacting. I just couldn't handle honest feedback. Their best friend even texted me separately, saying I should apologize to everyone for wasting their time and walking out. Apologize to them for leaving the ambush they'd set up. The mental gymnastics required to reach that conclusion were truly Olympic level. I blocked all of them, my partner, their family, their friends. I didn't owe anyone an explanation or a defense. I'd spent 90 minutes being told everything that was wrong with me by people who didn't actually know me or care about my perspective. I wasn't about to spend another minute entertaining their version of reality. The worst part was doubting myself afterward, because when 6 people spend an hour and a half telling you that you're the problem, part of you starts to wonder if maybe they're right. Maybe I was controlling and didn't realize it. Maybe I was defensive and jealous. It took weeks of talking to actual friends, people who knew me and the relationship, to remind myself that what happened wasn't normal or okay. A real therapist would have never allowed that setup. A real therapist would have stopped the session the moment it became clear I was being ganged up on. A real therapist wouldn't have validated every accusation without giving me space to respond. But this wasn't real therapy. It was theater, a performance designed to break me down and make me compliant. Looking back, I can see how calculated the whole thing was. They didn't want to fix the relationship. They wanted to fix me, to mold me into whatever version of a partner fit their family's expectations. And when I refused to sit there and absorb their criticism without pushing back, I became the villain in their story. My partner reached out a few more times over the following weeks, first with confusion, then with anger, and finally with what I guess was supposed to be an apology. But even their apology was conditional. They were sorry I felt ambushed, but I needed to understand they were just trying to help. They were sorry I got upset, but I also needed to acknowledge that some of the feedback was valid. It was the same pattern all over again. Apologize while simultaneously justifying the behavior and demanding I take some of the blame. I never responded. What was there to say? You can't reason with someone who thinks coordinating a fake therapy session to publicly criticize you is an act of love. You can't fix a relationship with someone who sees ambush and intervention as interchangeable terms. The whole experience taught me something important about boundaries and red flags. It's not just about the big, obvious betrayals. It's about the subtle ways people disrespect your autonomy and rewrite reality to fit their narrative. It's about recognizing when someone's version of helping you is really just about controlling you. So yeah, I walked away, and I never looked back. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. Because trust me, we're just getting started with the manipulation tactics. Now where was I? Oh right, walking out of that ambush disguised as therapy. But at least that betrayal happened face to face. The next story, that one happened behind closed doors, with a recording device nobody knew existed. Speaking of things happening behind your back, let me tell you about someone whose coworker turned surveillance into a personal weapon. I didn't think much of it at first. Rachel had always been a little intense, the type who took notes on everything, color-coded her calendar, and sent follow-up emails for conversations that happened in the hallway. So when I noticed her phone sitting face up on the table during our weekly team meetings, angled just slightly in my direction, I figured it was just another Rachel quirk. Maybe she was recording herself to review later, or tracking her own performance, or doing some productivity hack she'd read about on LinkedIn. I honestly didn't care. But then things started getting weird. I'd mention an idea during a meeting, something I'd been working on, maybe a new approach to a client problem or a workflow improvement, and the conversation would move on like it always does. Nothing unusual. Except a few days later, Rachel would bring up the exact same idea in front of our manager, packaged slightly differently, presented like it had been her brainchild all along. And she'd have notes, detailed notes, time-stamped notes. She'd pull them up on her laptop and show our manager, complete with bullet points and next steps, all framed as if she'd been developing this concept for weeks. The first time it happened, I thought maybe I'd misremembered. Maybe she had mentioned it and I just didn't notice. The second time, I started paying closer attention. The third time, I knew exactly what was happening. She was stealing my ideas, repackaging them, and taking credit. And somehow, she always had documentation to back herself up. I tried to brush it off. Office politics, right? People pull this stuff all the time. I started being more strategic about when I shared ideas, making sure to send follow-up emails after meetings so there'd be a paper trail with my name on it. I thought that would be enough. I thought if I just documented everything, it would protect me. I was wrong. One morning, my manager asked me to come into his office. The tone in his email was clipped formal, the kind of message that makes your stomach drop because you know it's not good. I walked in and he didn't even look up from his computer at first, just gestured for me to sit down. Then he closed the door. That's when I knew this wasn't a casual check-in. He said he'd been receiving complaints about me, about my behavior in meetings. He said I'd been hostile, dismissive, unprofessional. He said other team members felt uncomfortable, that I was creating a toxic environment, and that he needed to address it before it escalated further. I sat there, completely blindsided. Hostile, unprofessional. I bent over backwards to be collaborative, to support my team, to keep things positive even when projects got stressful. None of this made sense. Then he turned his monitor toward me, and he pressed play. It was my voice, my actual voice, from a team meeting maybe 2 weeks earlier, but the way it was cut, the way the audio jumped from one sentence to another, it sounded like I was attacking someone. A colleague had suggested an idea, and in the clip my response came across as condescending, dismissive, almost aggressive. Except that's not what happened. I remembered that meeting. I'd asked a clarifying question, then offered a counterpoint in a completely normal tone. But the clip didn't include the question. It didn't include the context. It didn't include the part where the other person agreed with me, and we moved forward together. It just had my voice, isolated, sounding like I was tearing someone down for no reason. He played another clip, then another. Each one the same, my words stripped of context, edited to make me sound like a nightmare to work with. I tried to explain. I tried to tell him that's not what happened, that something was wrong with those recordings, that someone was manipulating the audio. He looked at me like I was making excuses, like I was deflecting. He said the recordings were clear, that he couldn't ignore multiple incidents, and that I needed to take this seriously. I felt like the ground was disappearing under me. Because how do you defend yourself against your own voice? That's when I asked where the recordings came from. He hesitated. Then he said a team member had brought them to his attention because they were concerned about the work environment. He wouldn't say who, but I already knew. Rachel. I went back to my desk and I couldn't think straight. My hands were shaking. I pulled up the meeting schedules, cross-referenced the dates on the clips, and started going through my own notes. Every single recording he'd played had happened during a meeting where Rachel's phone had been sitting face up on the table, angled toward me. I realized she hadn't just been taking notes. She'd been recording me. For months, every meeting, every conversation, every offhand comment. And then she'd gone through those recordings, found moments she could edit, stripped out the context, and built a case against me. She'd weaponized my own words to destroy my reputation. This is where it gets absurd. I didn't know what to do at first. I thought about confronting her directly, but I knew that would just make things worse. If my manager already thought I was hostile, showing up angry would only confirm it in his mind. So I did the only thing I could think of. I went to HR. I explained everything. The phone, the stolen ideas, the edited recordings, the fact that I'd never consented to being recorded, and that in our state, recording someone without their knowledge in a private setting was illegal. The HR rep listened, took notes, and said they'd look into it. I wasn't sure if they believed me. I wasn't sure if anything would actually happen. But then they launched an investigation. They pulled Rachel into a meeting. They asked for her phone, and when they went through it, they found everything. Dozens of recordings, maybe more, all from team meetings, all focused on me, my voice, my comments, my ideas. Some of them were edited, some of them weren't, but the sheer volume of it was disturbing. She'd been recording me obsessively, cataloging everything I said, waiting for moments she could use. It wasn't just about stealing credit anymore. It was surveillance, it was targeted, it was calculated. HR also found the unedited versions of the clips she'd given to my manager, and when they compared them to what he'd been shown, the truth became obvious. She'd cut out entire sections of conversation. She'd removed questions, responses, context, anything that would have shown I was being reasonable. She'd turned normal workplace dialogue into something that sounded malicious. They fired her within a week. Violation of company policy, violation of recording consent laws, falsifying evidence, the whole thing. You'd think that would have felt like a victory, and in some ways it did. But the damage was already done, because even though Rachel was gone, even though HR cleared my name and my manager apologized, the reputation hit lingered. People had heard the rumors. They'd heard I was difficult. They'd heard there were complaints, and even after the truth came out, some of that stuck. Colleagues were cautious around me for months. Meetings felt different. I could tell people were being careful with their words, like they were worried I might snap. It took a long time to rebuild trust. I had to prove over and over that I wasn't the person Rachel had tried to make me look like. I had to be patient when I wanted to scream. I had to stay professional when I felt like I'd been violated. And slowly, things got better. But it was exhausting. And it never should have happened in the first place. All because one person decided to weaponize technology against me. All because someone I worked with every day chose to destroy my reputation instead of just doing her job. The thing that still gets me is how calculated it was. She didn't just record me once and get lucky. She did it over and over. She built a library of my voice, my words, my ideas, and then she used it against me whenever it suited her. That's not a mistake. That's not a misunderstanding. That's deliberate. That's malicious. And the worst part, she almost got away with it. At least that violation got discovered, but sometimes the betrayal comes from the people you'd literally give anything for. Sarah and I had been best friends since sophomore year of college. We'd been through everything together. Bad breakups, family drama, career changes, the whole 9 yards. We were the kind of friends who showed up for each other, no questions asked. So when she got engaged to her longtime boyfriend, I was genuinely thrilled for her. We were grabbing coffee about a week after the proposal when she started talking about wedding venues. Her eyes lit up as she described this historic mansion about an hour outside the city. She'd been obsessed with it since we'd driven past it junior year. It had these gorgeous gardens, this old Victorian architecture, the kind of place that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. "It's perfect," she said, pulling up photos on her phone, "but it's way out of our budget. We're probably going to end up doing something at a hotel or a restaurant." I could hear the disappointment in her voice. This wasn't just about wanting a fancy wedding. This venue meant something to her. It represented this dream she'd been holding on to for years. I didn't even think about it that hard. "What if I covered the venue cost as my wedding gift to you?" She looked at me like I'd just offered her a kidney. "Are you serious? Do you know how much that place costs?" "I've been saving pretty aggressively for the past few years," I said. "I can swing it. And honestly, I can't think of anything I'd rather spend it on than seeing you get married in your dream venue." She started crying right there in the coffee shop, like full-on tears streaming down her face. She grabbed my hands across the table and told me I was the most amazing friend she'd ever had. She promised that I'd be her maid of honor, that we'd plan everything together, that this was going to be the best wedding ever. The venue cost was $8,000, not a small amount of money, but I had it, and I meant what I said. I wanted her to have her dream wedding. I paid the deposit that week and the remaining balance a month later, 6 months before the wedding date. Sarah sent me about 100 thank you texts. She kept saying she couldn't believe how lucky she was to have me in her life. For the first few months, everything was great. We went dress shopping together. She asked for my opinion on flowers, on the menu, on the color scheme. I felt like I was actually part of the planning process, like we were building this day together. Then things started getting weird. About 2 months before the wedding, Sarah started becoming less available. She'd take longer to respond to my texts. When we did talk, conversations felt stilted, like she was holding something back. I tried not to read too much into it. Wedding planning is stressful. Maybe she was just overwhelmed. 2 weeks before the big day, I realized I still hadn't received any information about the bridesmaid dress. I'd seen photos of her other bridesmaids in their dresses. They'd done a fitting about a month earlier. But I hadn't been invited, and no one had sent me any details about where to get the dress or what size to order. I texted Sarah asking about it, trying to keep my tone casual and not accusatory. Her response was vague. "Oh yeah, I've been meaning to talk to you about that. Let me get back to you." She didn't get back to me. I texted again 3 days later. This time she said she'd been so busy with last-minute details and she'd send me the information soon. But she didn't. I started getting this sinking feeling in my stomach. Something was off. I called her and she didn't pick up. I called again the next day, straight to voicemail. Finally, the night before the wedding, my phone rang at almost 10 p.m. It was Sarah. "Hey," she said, and I could immediately tell from her voice that this wasn't going to be good news. "So I need to talk to you about tomorrow." My heart was already racing. "Okay. The thing is, Ryan's sister has been really vocal about wanting to be involved in the wedding. And to keep peace with his family, we decided it would be better if she was the maid of honor instead." I sat there in silence for a moment, trying to process what I was hearing. Instead of me. "Yeah, but you can still come as a guest. You'll still be there. It'll still be great." The casual way she said it, like she was telling me about a minor seating chart change, and not the fact that she was demoting me from maid of honor the night before her wedding, was almost more insulting than the actual decision. But that wasn't even the worst part. "Sarah," I said slowly, "I paid for your venue. $8,000. You promised me I'd be your maid of honor." There was a pause. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted. She sounded defensive, almost annoyed. "That was a gift. You gave that to me as a gift. You can't hold that over my head now." "This isn't a transaction." I felt like I'd been slapped. "I'm not trying to hold anything over your head. I'm trying to understand how we went from me being your maid of honor to me being downgraded to a regular guest with less than 24 hours' notice." "It's complicated," she said. "Ryan's family has certain expectations, and his sister has been really hurt that she wasn't asked to be maid of honor from the beginning. We're trying to start our marriage off on the right foot with his family." "And what about starting it off on the right foot with me, your supposed best friend?" "You're being really unfair right now," she said, and I could hear the anger creeping into her voice. "I'm getting married tomorrow. This is supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and you're trying to make it about you and your money." The audacity was genuinely breathtaking. "I'm not making it about the money," I said, even though at this point, yeah, it was absolutely about the money too. "I'm making it about the fact that you're treating me like I'm disposable after I've been nothing but supportive of you through this entire process. If you can't be happy for me and put aside your own feelings for one day, then maybe you shouldn't come at all." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was actually trying to make me the bad guy in this scenario. She was the one who'd changed the entire arrangement at the last possible second, and somehow I was the one being unreasonable for having feelings about it. "You're right," I said. "Maybe I shouldn't come at all." "Fine," she snapped. "If that's how you want to be about it, then don't come." She hung up. I sat there staring at my phone, trying to figure out how a conversation about being uninvited from the wedding party had turned into me being uninvited from the wedding entirely. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, wondering if I'd overreacted, if I should have just swallowed my hurt feelings and shown up as a guest. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. This wasn't just about the maid of honor position. This was about the fact that Sarah had accepted $8,000 from me, made promises about what that meant for my role in her wedding, and then casually tossed those promises aside the second it became inconvenient for her. And when I tried to talk to her about it, she'd accused me of being transactional and trying to ruin her day. The next morning, I didn't go to the wedding. I didn't send a gift. I didn't send a card. I blocked her number because I knew if I didn't, I'd spend the whole day obsessively checking to see if she texted me. The whole thing felt surreal. This person I'd considered one of my closest friends had essentially used me for money and then discarded me when I was no longer useful. And she'd done it while somehow convincing herself that I was the problem. A few weeks later, I got a text from a mutual friend asking what had happened. Apparently, Sarah had been telling people that I'd made her wedding about money and had refused to come because I wasn't the center of attention. She was playing the victim, acting like I'd been the unreasonable one. I sent our mutual friend screenshots of our text conversations and a summary of what had actually happened. I didn't do it to be vindictive. I did it because I was tired of being painted as the bad guy, when all I'd done was stand up for myself after being used. The mutual friend stopped talking to Sarah after that. Turns out I wasn't the only person Sarah had screwed over during the wedding planning process. She'd apparently asked another friend to make her wedding cake as a gift, then complained that it wasn't professional enough and demanded a partial refund for ingredients. What kind of person accepts thousands of dollars from their friends and then treats them like garbage? I never got an apology. Sarah never reached out to try to make things right. She kept the $8,000, had her dream wedding at the venue I paid for, and moved on with her life like I'd never existed. The thing that really gets me is that she genuinely seems to believe she did nothing wrong. In her mind, I gave her a gift with no strings attached, and then got mad when things didn't go my way. She's completely rewritten the narrative to make herself the victim of an unreasonable friend who couldn't handle not being the center of attention. But here's what actually happened. I gave my best friend an incredibly generous gift because I loved her and wanted her to have her dream wedding. In return, she made me promises about what my role in that wedding would be. Then, when it became convenient for her to break those promises, she did it without a second thought. And when I expressed hurt about it, she turned it around on me and acted like I was the one being manipulative. That's not friendship. That's just using someone. I don't regret standing up for myself. I don't regret refusing to go to that wedding. What I do regret is not seeing the signs earlier. Looking back, there were moments throughout our friendship where Sarah had been kind of selfish, kind of thoughtless. But I'd always made excuses for her because that's what friends do, right? Except real friends don't treat each other like ATMs. Real friends don't make promises they have no intention of keeping. And real friends definitely don't try to gaslight you into thinking you're the problem when they're the ones who betrayed your trust. We haven't spoken since that phone call the night before her wedding. I've seen updates about her life through social media, seen photos of her with her new friend group, watched her live the life she wanted without me in it. And honestly, I'm okay with that. Some friendships aren't meant to last. Some people show you exactly who they are when they think they can get away with it. Sarah showed me that she valued $8,000 and keeping her in-laws happy more than she valued our entire friendship. That's all the information I needed. Money has a way of revealing people's true colors, doesn't it? Just wait until you hear how one person's biggest career moment became their worst nightmare. The annual company gala was supposed to be my night. I'd spent the last 14 months leading a project that had become the biggest success story in our department's history. We'd exceeded every metric, brought in new clients, and basically set a new standard for what our team could accomplish. So when they announced I'd be receiving the Innovation Excellence Award, I was genuinely proud. This felt like validation, like proof that all the long hours and stress had been worth it. I wore my best suit. I sat at a table with my team, people I'd worked alongside and sometimes carried through the toughest parts of the project. The room was full of executives, department heads, people whose names I'd only seen in company-wide emails. It was a big deal, the kind of night that's supposed to mark a turning point in your career. When they called my name, I walked up to the stage, shook hands with our CEO, and accepted this beautiful glass trophy that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Everyone applauded. I gave a short thank you speech, kept it humble, credited my team, standard stuff. Then I sat back down, and that's when my mentor stood up to say a few words. David had been my manager when I first joined the company 3 years ago. He'd since moved up to a director role, but we'd stayed close. He'd opened doors for me, recommended me for projects, given me advice that genuinely helped my career. I considered him one of the few people in corporate leadership I actually trusted. So when he approached the microphone, I was expecting something nice, maybe a little embarrassing, the way mentors tend to get when they're proud of someone they've helped develop. He started off well, talked about how talented I was, how dedicated, mentioned specific moments from the project where I'd really shined. I was smiling, genuinely appreciative, and then he said it. You know, when we first hired them, I honestly didn't think they'd last a month. The room got a little quieter. I felt my smile freeze on my face. He kept going. They were a diversity hire, and I'll be honest, I voted against bringing them on. I thought we were just checking a box, meeting a quota, but they proved me completely wrong. Then came the breaking point. The silence in that ballroom was deafening. I could feel every eye in the room either on David or on me. He didn't seem to notice. He just kept talking about how surprised he'd been by my work ethic, how I'd exceeded his expectations, how glad he was to have been wrong. It was supposed to be complimentary. In his mind, he was telling this inspiring story about someone defying his doubts. But all I heard was the truth. I was a diversity hire. He'd voted against me. Every opportunity he'd given me, every piece of mentorship, every door he'd opened, I now had to question whether it was because he saw potential in me or because he felt guilty about his initial prejudice. I sat there holding this award, this symbol of achievement, and felt it turn to ash in my hands, because suddenly every win was tainted. Every project he'd assigned me, was that because I was the best person for the job, or because he was trying to prove to himself he wasn't biased? Every piece of positive feedback, was it genuine or just him overcompensating? The applause when he finished felt scattered and uncomfortable. A few people at my table looked at me with this mixture of pity and secondhand embarrassment. I didn't know what expression was on my face. I felt numb. David sat back down, still completely oblivious to what he'd just done, and someone else got up to present the next award. I stayed for the rest of the dinner because leaving would have made it worse. I smiled when people congratulated me. I nodded when teammates said David's speech was inappropriate. One person even pulled me aside and said, "That was messed up. I hope you know your work speaks for itself." But it didn't help. The damage was already done. The thing that really got me was how casual he'd been about it. Like admitting he'd seen me as a quota filler was just a charming detail in his redemption arc. He got to be the enlightened manager who overcame his own bias, and I got to be the diversity hire who worked hard enough to earn his respect. As if my merit had ever been the question. I kept replaying every interaction we'd had over the past 3 years. The time he'd championed me for a promotion was that guilt. The projects he'd trusted me with were those genuine opportunities or experiments to see if I could actually perform. Every coffee chat where he'd given me career advice, was he mentoring me or managing his own conscience? And here's where it gets absurd. After the gala ended, David found me near the coat check. He was in a great mood, riding the high of the evening. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "That speech really came from the heart. I meant every word." And I just looked at him, waiting for some acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, he'd said something incredibly damaging. But there was nothing. He genuinely thought he'd given a touching testimonial. I said, "Thanks for the kind words," because what else was I supposed to say? Make a scene at the company gala? Break down and explain why being called a diversity hire in front of the entire leadership team had just nuked my sense of belonging? He wouldn't have understood anyway. In his mind, he'd overcome his bias, and that made him one of the good ones. I went home that night and couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the times I'd worked twice as hard as my colleagues, stayed later, volunteered for the difficult projects. I'd thought I was building a reputation. Turns out, at least in David's eyes, I was just proving I wasn't a mistake. Not earning respect as a given, but as an exception. The next morning, I updated my resume. I wasn't even angry anymore, just exhausted. Exhausted by the realization that I'd been carrying this invisible weight the entire time without knowing it. That while I'd been focused on doing good work, at least one person in leadership had been measuring me against their lowered expectations. I started applying to jobs that same week, reached out to recruiters, had coffee with former colleagues at other companies, and every time someone asked why I was looking to leave after such a successful project, I'd give some generic answer about seeking new challenges, Because how do you explain that your mentor's praise had shattered your confidence more effectively than any criticism ever could? 3 months later, I accepted an offer at a competitor. Better title, better pay, better everything. When I gave my notice, David seemed genuinely hurt. He asked if there was anything the company could do to keep me. I almost laughed. What was he going to do? Unsay what he'd said? Go back in time and vote to hire me for the right reasons? I told him it was just time for a change. He said he understood, but that he'd always be proud of the growth he'd witnessed in me. And there it was again, that subtle implication that my success was somehow unexpected, that I'd grown from something lesser into something acceptable. People ask me sometimes if I regret leaving, if I threw away a good thing because of one speech, but they don't get it. It wasn't just one speech. It was the knowledge that everything I'd built there was constructed on a foundation I hadn't known about, that the person who'd helped me most had also doubted me most, that I'd been working to prove something I didn't know needed proving. The worst part is I can't even be fully angry at him, because in his mind, he did change. He did overcome his bias. He did give me opportunities, and in some twisted way, he probably thinks his speech was empowering. Look at this person who defied my expectations. Isn't that inspiring? But I didn't want to defy expectations. I wanted to meet them. I wanted to be hired because someone saw my qualifications and thought I'd be good at the job, not because I filled a demographic requirement and then surprised everyone by being competent. Some truths, once spoken, can't be unheard, and some relationships, once you see the foundation they're built on, can't be repaired. David accidentally revealed that he'd never seen me the way I thought he had, and once I knew that, there was no going back. I'm at my new company now, different team, different culture, different opportunities, and I'm doing well, but I'm also hyper-aware in a way I wasn't before. When someone gives me a project, I wonder about their motivations. When I get praised, I question if it's genuine or performative. That gala speech didn't just damage my relationship with David. It damaged my ability to trust professional mentorship at all. Maybe that's unfair to my new colleagues. Maybe I'm carrying baggage that doesn't belong in this new space. But that's what happens when someone accidentally tells you that your biggest achievement was just proving you weren't the mistake they thought you were. You start questioning everything. That accidental confession at least gave me clarity. But the next person's truth came wrapped in fake praise and devastating consequences. It happened during our monthly team meeting. My manager stood up in front of everyone and started talking about integrity in the workplace. He said the company was built on trust and ethical standards, and that he wanted to recognize someone who embodied those values. Then he looked directly at me and started clapping. Everyone else joined in. He said I had unwavering ethical standards and that I'd done the right thing by reporting a vendor who tried to bribe me for a contract. I'm not going to lie. It felt good. Really good. I'd spent weeks agonizing over whether to report that vendor. They'd offered me courtside tickets and a weekend getaway if I'd pushed their proposal through, and I'd turned them down and immediately told my manager. Part of me worried it would cause problems, that maybe I should have just handled it quietly. But here he was, publicly validating my decision in front of the whole team. I actually felt proud, like I'd made the right call and it mattered. 2 weeks later, I got an email asking me to come to my manager's office. When I walked in, he didn't waste time with small talk. He said they were restructuring some responsibilities and that I'd be transitioning off my client-facing projects. All of them. I'd be moved to internal operations, helping with process documentation and data organization. Busy work, basically. I asked why. He leaned back in his chair and said, "You're too rigid. Clients need flexibility, and your approach doesn't always align with how we do business." I just stared at him. Too rigid? This was the same person who'd praised my ethics 2 weeks ago in front of the entire team, the same person who'd made a whole speech about integrity, and now he was pulling me off projects because I had standards. I tried to push back. I asked what I'd done wrong, what client had complained, what specific situation had caused this decision. He got vague, said it wasn't about one thing, just an overall concern about fit, said the company needed people who could navigate grey areas, who understood that business required compromise. I left that meeting feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach, and here's where it gets absurd. Over the next month, I watched everything unfold from my new desk in the corner. I wasn't on client calls anymore, wasn't in strategy meetings, wasn't part of any real decision-making. But I could see what was happening. I watched my colleague Jake accept a luxury watch from a vendor right before approving their contract renewal. He wore it to the office. Nobody said anything. I watched another team member fudge numbers on a quarterly report to make a struggling project look profitable. Our manager signed off on it without question. Then there was the expense situation. One of my former clients took a few team members out for dinner, and the bill came back at over $3,000. Bottles of wine that cost more than my rent. The client paid, obviously, but then my colleagues approved a contract amendment that just happened to benefit that same client in ways that weren't exactly above board. Quid pro quo, right there in front of everyone, and nobody cared. Nobody got pulled into an office and told they were too rigid. Nobody got reassigned to busy work for accepting gifts or cooking the books or playing favorites with clients who bought them expensive dinners. The same manager who'd publicly celebrated my ethics was now actively rewarding people for having none. I started documenting everything, every questionable transaction I could see, every policy violation, every instance where someone bent the rules and got praised for being a team player. I kept emails, I screenshot reports, I noted dates and names and amounts. I wasn't even sure what I was going to do with it all. I just knew something was deeply wrong and I needed proof. Then came the breaking point. My manager called another team meeting, another recognition moment apparently. He praised Jake for his client relationship skills, for his ability to build trust and close deals. He specifically mentioned the vendor contract Jake had renewed, calling it a win for the company. I sat there watching Jake beam while wearing the watch that vendor had given him, and I realized my manager knew. He had to know. This wasn't ignorance, this was endorsement. That night, I put together everything I'd documented and took it to HR. I explained the bribery, the falsified reports, the expense violations, the pattern of rewarding unethical behavior while punishing people who followed the rules. The HR rep listened, took copies of my documentation, and said they'd look into it. They did launch an investigation, I'll give them that. They interviewed people, reviewed files, asked questions. And what happened? My manager got a slap on the wrist. A few team members got reminded of company policy. Jake had to return the watch. The numbers on that quarterly report got quietly corrected. But I became the problem. Suddenly I was difficult to work with. I'd created a hostile environment. I'd damaged team morale by raising concerns instead of addressing them privately. Never mind that I had addressed them privately with my manager and got reassigned for it. Never mind that the private route had gotten me nowhere. I'd gone to HR and that made me a troublemaker. My manager started excluding me from emails. Colleagues stopped talking to me in the break room. I'd walk into conversations and they'd go quiet. One of my former teammates told me, off the record, that management was building a case to let me go. They were documenting every tiny mistake, every missed deadline, every moment where I didn't seem like a culture fit. They wanted me gone, but they wanted it to look justified. The HR rep who'd taken my complaint pulled me aside one day and suggested very carefully that I might want to start looking at other opportunities. She didn't say I was being pushed out. She didn't have to. The writing was on the wall. I could either resign on my own terms or wait for them to manufacture a reason to fire me. I chose to leave. I updated my resume, started applying elsewhere, and gave my notice 3 weeks later. My exit interview was a joke. They asked what could have been done differently, and I almost laughed. What could have been done differently? They could have not punished me for having integrity. They could have not rewarded corruption. They could have actually valued the ethics they claim to care about. But integrity, it turns out, is only valued when it's convenient, when it doesn't cost anything, when it doesn't interfere with questionable contracts or inflated numbers, or keeping clients happy at any cost. The moment my ethics became inconvenient, the moment they threatened the informal system of favors and flexibility everyone else was comfortable with, they became a problem. I became a problem. I found a new job within 2 months. Better pay, better culture, better leadership. But the whole experience left a mark. It taught me that sometimes the people who praise your values the loudest are the first ones to punish you for actually living by them. That doing the right thing doesn't always protect you. That systems protect themselves, and if you threaten the system, you'll be dealt with no matter how right you are. I don't regret reporting that vendor. I don't regret documenting the corruption or taking it to HR. I regret believing that any of it would matter. I regret thinking that public praise meant anything when the private reality was so different. And I regret not seeing sooner that my manager's speech about integrity was just performance. Words he said because they sounded good. not because he meant them. Being labeled difficult for doing the right thing, unfortunately, that's just the beginning of how far some people will go. My boss Mark had always been the type who valued trust above everything else. At least that's what he said in every team meeting. He'd go on about how we were a family, how loyalty mattered more than individual performance, how we all needed to have each other's backs. I bought into it. I genuinely believed that being part of his inner circle meant something. So when he pulled me aside one morning before the rest of the team arrived, I figured he wanted to talk about a promotion or maybe assign me to a high-profile project. He closed his office door and looked at me with this serious expression that made me straighten up in my chair. "I need to ask you something important," he said. "Are you loyal to this team, to me? Because I need someone I can trust completely." I didn't even hesitate. "Of course, absolutely." He nodded like I'd just passed some kind of test. "Good. That's what I thought. I'm glad I can count on you." I left that meeting feeling proud. He saw me as reliable, as someone he could depend on. In a workplace full of people constantly jockeying for position and trying to get ahead, being singled out as trustworthy felt like a real achievement. That afternoon, everything changed. Mark's assistant came by my desk and told me there was an emergency meeting in the conference room. The client on our biggest account was on speakerphone, and from the tone in her voice, I could tell this wasn't a casual check-in. I grabbed my laptop and headed in, trying to figure out what could have gone wrong. The client was furious. A major deadline had been missed, one that had cost them thousands of dollars in lost revenue and damaged their relationship with one of their own clients. She wanted answers. She wanted to know how this had happened, who was responsible, and what we were going to do to make it right. Mark went into damage control mode immediately. He was apologetic, understanding, reassuring. He told her he took full responsibility as the team leader and that he'd get to the bottom of exactly what went wrong. Then he said it. "I delegated this project to my team member here." He gestured toward me, "and unfortunately they dropped the ball. I take full responsibility for not supervising them more closely. This is on me for not catching the issue sooner." I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. Every eye in the room turned to me. The client went quiet for a second, then asked if I had anything to say for myself. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out, because I had never touched that project, not once. I'd never been assigned to it, never received a single email about it, never even sat in on a meeting where it was discussed. This was Mark's project, his client relationship, his responsibility, and he'd just thrown me under the bus in front of everyone. Mark continued smoothly, explaining how he'd work with me to ensure this never happened again, how he'd implement better oversight systems, how he valued this client relationship too much to let something like this slide. He made himself sound like the responsible leader dealing with an incompetent employee, and he made me sound like I'd screwed up and was too ashamed to even defend myself. The meeting ended with Mark promising to send over a detailed action plan and offering a discount on next month's services. The client seemed mollified, if not entirely satisfied. Everyone filed out of the conference room. I stayed in my seat, still trying to process what had just happened. Mark came back in a few minutes later, closing the door behind him. I expected an apology, an explanation, something that would make sense of why he'd just lied to a client about my involvement in a project I'd never worked on. Instead, he smiled. I smoothed it over. "You're fine." "I'm fine?" I repeated. "Mark, I had nothing to do with that project. You just told the client I was responsible for a massive screw-up that I didn't even know about." He waved his hand dismissively. "I know that, but they needed someone to blame, and I needed to keep the account. This is what loyalty looks like. I'm protecting the team by giving them a scapegoat, and you're that scapegoat this time. It'll blow over." The casual way he said it made my blood run cold. He'd used my silence in that meeting as consent. Because I hadn't immediately spoken up to defend myself, he assumed I'd just go along with it. He'd asked me about loyalty that morning, and this was his test. He wanted to see if I'd let him sacrifice me to save face. "I didn't agree to this," I said. "You didn't have to," he replied. "That's what being part of a team means. Sometimes you take one for the group. I've done it before. Other people on this team have done it. Now it's your turn." He genuinely believed what he was saying. In his mind, loyalty meant being willing to absorb blame for things you didn't do. It meant letting your boss use your name and reputation as a shield whenever things went wrong. And if you weren't willing to do that, you weren't a team player. I left his office feeling sick. The rest of the afternoon, I couldn't focus on anything. Co-workers kept giving me sympathetic looks, and I knew they all believed I'd actually messed up that project. My reputation, which I'd spent years building, had been trashed in a single meeting, and Mark expected me to just accept it. This is where it gets absurd. That night, I went through my emails. I pulled every message related to that project, every communication between Mark and the client, every deadline and deliverable. I built a complete timeline showing that I'd never been assigned to it, that Mark had been the sole point of contact, and that he'd missed the deadline because he'd overcommitted and failed to deliver. The next morning, I contacted the client directly. I explained that there had been a misunderstanding in yesterday's meeting and that I wanted to provide clarity about what had actually happened. I sent over the documentation, the email chains, everything that proved Mark had lied. The client called Mark within an hour. I wasn't in that conversation, but I heard about it from the assistant who'd been asked to sit in and take notes. The client was furious all over again, but this time the anger was directed at Mark for trying to cover up his own failure by blaming an employee who had nothing to do with it. They demanded to know why he'd lied, why he'd thrown me under the bus, and whether anything else he'd told them over the years had been fabricated. Mark came storming out of his office looking for me. He found me at my desk and told me to come with him immediately. We went into a conference room, and he absolutely lost it. "You betrayed my trust," he said. "I asked you this morning if you were loyal, and you said yes. Then you went behind my back to the client and made me look like a liar." "You are a liar," I said. "You lied to the client about my involvement. You used my name to cover up your own mistake." "That's not how this works," he snapped. "In this company, we protect each other. When I asked you about loyalty, this is what I meant. I needed you to have my back, and you stabbed me in it instead." The irony was completely lost on him. He was accusing me of betrayal while simultaneously admitting that his version of loyalty required me to let him destroy my professional reputation. "I'm not going to let you ruin my career because you can't manage your own projects," I said. He stared at me for a long moment and I could see him calculating. He knew he couldn't fire me without it looking like retaliation, especially now that the client knew the truth. But he also knew our working relationship was over. "Clear out your desk," he finally said. "You're done here." "You're firing me for telling the truth? I'm terminating your employment for insubordination and damaging client relationships." I walked out of that conference room knowing I was about to lose my job, but I didn't care anymore. I'd already started documenting everything for the inevitable conversation with HR and my eventual lawsuit for wrongful termination. Mark thought he could bully me into compliance, thought that asking for loyalty gave him permission to use me however he wanted. He learned pretty quickly that loyalty has to go both ways. HR got involved. The client relationship deteriorated further when they learned Mark had tried to fire the person who'd actually told them the truth. I ended up leaving the company with a severance package and a glowing reference letter from someone above Mark in the corporate chain. Mark got demoted and eventually pushed out 6 months later. I left that job understanding something crucial about workplace dynamics. Some people use words like loyalty and teamwork as weapons. They create this culture where questioning authority or standing up for yourself gets labeled as betrayal, and they surround themselves with people who are too scared or too naive to push back. Mark didn't want loyal employees. He wanted scapegoats he could deploy whenever he needed to cover his own mistakes. And when I refused to play that role, when I chose to protect my own reputation over his ego, he acted like I'd committed some unforgivable sin. The truth is, real loyalty isn't about taking blame for things you didn't do. It's not about letting someone sacrifice you to save themselves. Real loyalty is mutual. It's built on trust and respect, not manipulation and fear. Mark never understood that, and that's why his version of leadership eventually collapsed. At least in the workplace, you can leave. But when family turns your vacation into an ambush, there's nowhere to hide. My parents had been talking about this beach vacation for months. They'd found this beautiful resort right on the water, with these amazing views and a spa and everything. They said it would be good for the whole family to get together. Just relax, reconnect. I was honestly excited. Work had been brutal, and the idea of a week doing nothing but reading on the beach and eating good food sounded perfect. I requested the time off, booked my flight, packed my bags. My parents covered the resort cost as their treat, which should have been my first red flag, but I just thought they were being generous. When I arrived, everyone was already there. My two siblings, their spouses, even my aunt and uncle from across the country. It felt a little weird that the entire extended family had shown up for what I thought was just a casual vacation, but I figured maybe everyone just had the same idea about needing a break. The first day was fine. We hung out by the pool, had dinner together, caught up on life. Normal family vacation stuff. I mentioned that I'd just gotten a new car, and everyone seemed happy for me. My brother asked what I'd bought. I showed him some photos. He said it looked great. No weirdness, no tension, just a normal conversation. The second day, my dad asked if we could all meet by the pool after lunch for a quick family chat. He said it casually, like it was no big deal. Maybe we were going to plan activities for the rest of the week, or talk about splitting a dinner bill or something. I showed up in my swimsuit, ready to hop in the pool right after. That's when I noticed everyone else was fully dressed, and they'd pulled chairs into a circle, and my mum was holding a folder. My dad started talking before I even sat down. We wanted to use this time together to discuss something important. We're all worried about you and some of the financial decisions you've been making. I just stared at him. Financial decisions. I had a good job. I paid my bills. I wasn't asking anyone for money. What was there to discuss? But he kept going. You're 32 years old. You're still renting an apartment. You don't own property. You have no assets. And now you've just bought a brand new car, which frankly seems irresponsible given your situation. My situation. Like I was some kind of charity case. My mum jumped in, her voice already shaky like she was about to cry. We just want what's best for you. We want you to be secure. We want you to build a future. Then my sister spoke up. I think what they're trying to say is that it's time to start thinking about real investments. A house, a family, the things that actually matter. And that's when I realized this wasn't a casual conversation. This was planned, coordinated. They'd all discussed this before the trip. They'd probably had meetings about it, and they'd used a family vacation as bait to trap me into this intervention. But that wasn't even the worst part. My dad opened a laptop and pulled up a spreadsheet, an actual spreadsheet, with my estimated income, my rent costs, my car payment, everything. I don't know how he got half of this information. Maybe he'd asked me about it over the past few months, and I'd answered without thinking. Maybe my siblings had been reporting back to him. Either way, he'd built a full financial breakdown of my life without my knowledge or permission. He started going through it line by line. My rent was too high for someone without equity. I should be living somewhere cheaper and saving for a down payment. My car payment was frivolous. I could have bought something used and put that money toward a mortgage. My savings account, while decent, wasn't growing fast enough. I needed to be more aggressive with investments. My brother-in-law, who I barely knew, chimed in with advice about index funds. My aunt started talking about how she'd bought her first house at 25 and how important it was to build wealth early. My uncle said something about how my generation didn't understand the value of property ownership. I just sat there, feeling like I was in some kind of surreal nightmare. They were dissecting my entire financial life in front of me like I was a case study, like I was some kind of project that needed fixing. And here's where it gets absurd. My mum started crying, full tears streaming down her face, and she said, I just don't understand why you're not thinking about giving us grandchildren. You're not financially stable enough to start a family, and time is running out. There it was, the real issue. This wasn't actually about my finances. It was about the fact that I was 32, unmarried, and not popping out babies on their preferred timeline. The financial intervention was just a convenient framework to pressure me about my entire life. I looked around the circle at all these people, my family, who'd apparently spent months planning this ambush, who'd coordinated schedules, booked flights, prepared spreadsheets, all so they could corner me at a beach resort and tell me everything I was doing wrong. So this whole vacation was just a setup? I asked. My dad looked almost offended. It's not a setup. It's an intervention. We love you, and we're concerned. We wanted to create a space where we could have an honest conversation. An honest conversation would have been asking me if I wanted to talk about this, not trapping me on a vacation I can't leave and ambushing me with a PowerPoint presentation about my failures. My sister sighed like I was being dramatic. See, this is exactly the defensiveness we were worried about. You can't accept constructive criticism. Constructive criticism. They were calling this constructive criticism. For 2 hours, they kept going. Every choice I'd made was put under a microscope. My apartment was in the wrong neighborhood. My job, while stable, didn't have enough growth potential. My social life was too focused on friends instead of finding a serious relationship. Even my hobbies came under fire. Apparently, the money I spent on concerts and travel could be better allocated toward building a future. The thing that really killed me was how genuinely confused they seemed by my reaction. They truly believed they were helping. In their minds, they'd organized this thoughtful intervention because they cared about me. The fact that I felt ambushed and violated didn't compute. To them, I was just being stubborn and refusing to see reason. I excused myself, said I needed some air, and went back to my room. I didn't go back to the pool, I didn't join them for dinner. I sat in my room looking at flights and booked the first one I could find for the next morning. It was expensive, a last-minute ticket, but I didn't care. I had to get out of there. That night, my mum knocked on my door. She seemed shocked that I was packing. "What are you doing?" "The vacation isn't over. I'm leaving." "Because of the family meeting?" "Honey, we were just trying to help. You ambushed me. You used a vacation as bait to trap me into listening to you tear apart my life for 2 hours." She looked genuinely hurt. "We didn't tear apart your life. We offered guidance. We want you to be happy and secure." "I am happy. I am secure. You just don't like the way I've chosen to live." She tried to hug me, but I stepped back. I told her I'd see her when I got home, and I left early the next morning before anyone else was awake. I took a cab to the airport, got on my flight, and felt this overwhelming sense of relief the moment the plane took off. My phone exploded with messages over the next few days. My dad said I'd overreacted and embarrassed the family. My siblings said I was being immature and couldn't handle honest feedback. My aunt sent a long text about how lucky I was to have a family that cared enough to intervene. Not a single person apologized. Not one of them acknowledged that maybe, just maybe, what they'd done was wildly inappropriate. Things went from bad to unhinged. A few weeks later, my mum called and invited me to Thanksgiving. Like nothing had happened. Like we were all just going to move past the beach intervention and pretend it never occurred. When I said I wasn't coming, she was shocked. She said I was holding a grudge over nothing, that I was tearing the family apart by refusing to let go of one uncomfortable conversation. One uncomfortable conversation. That's what she called it. I tried to explain again why what they did was wrong. But she just kept circling back to their intentions. They meant well. They were worried. They loved me. As if good intentions erased the fact that they'd planned a coordinated ambush, disguised as a vacation. I haven't been to a family gathering since. They still invite me. They still act confused about why I won't come. My siblings occasionally text saying I'm being ridiculous and that I need to get over it. My dad sent an email a few months ago saying that if I wanted to repair the relationship, I needed to be willing to accept guidance from people who know better. Guidance. He's still calling it guidance. The whole experience taught me something important. Some people genuinely believe that caring about you gives them the right to control you. That love is a sufficient excuse for crossing boundaries. That if their intentions are good, the impact of their actions doesn't matter. My family spent months planning that intervention. They coordinated schedules, booked a resort, created spreadsheets, prepared talking points. All that energy, all that effort, and it never once occurred to them to just ask me if I wanted their input. They decided what I needed, and then they executed their plan without my consent. And now they're mad that I won't participate in family events. They're hurt that I've created distance. They think I'm being petty and holding on to anger for no reason. Because in their minds, they were helping. And if I can't see that, I'm the problem. I'm doing fine, by the way. Still renting my apartment, still driving my car, still living my life exactly the way I want to. And I'm happy. Genuinely happy. Which is something they never bothered to ask about during their intervention. Family ambushes are brutal, but at least you know who set the trap. The next violation was so calculated, I didn't see it coming until the legal paperwork arrived. I was at work when my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. Normally I'd let it go to voicemail, but something made me pick up. A woman identified herself as calling from a debt collection agency, and my first thought was that she had the wrong person. I don't have debt. I'm obsessive about my credit score. I pay everything on time. I don't even carry a balance on my credit cards. Then she said she was calling about an unpaid business loan in the amount of $45,000. I actually laughed. I told her there was obviously some mistake, that I'd never taken out a business loan, that I didn't even own a business. She insisted the loan was in my name and that I'd signed as a guarantor. I asked her to send me the paperwork because this was clearly some kind of identity theft situation or clerical error. The documents arrived 2 days later. I opened the envelope expecting to see some obvious fraud, a fake signature, maybe my information stolen and used by a stranger. Instead, I saw my actual signature, or something that looked exactly like it, on a loan guarantor form for my brother's restaurant. My stomach dropped. I read through the entire document twice, trying to make sense of it. The loan had been taken out 8 months ago. It was for startup capital for a restaurant my brother had mentioned wanting to open. I remembered him talking about it, remembered him asking if I thought it was a good idea. I'd been supportive but non-committal. I'd definitely never agreed to guarantee a $45,000 loan. I called him immediately. He answered on the third ring, sounding casual, like nothing was wrong. I asked him point blank if he'd taken out a business loan. He said yeah, for the restaurant, but it hadn't worked out, so he'd closed it down a few months ago. I asked him why a debt collector was calling me about it. There was a pause, then he said, "Oh, about that," like it was a minor detail he'd forgotten to mention. He explained, and I used that word loosely, that he'd needed a guarantor for the loan and he'd asked me, but I was asleep on the couch. He said he didn't want to wake me up and he figured I'd say yes anyway since I'd been supportive of the restaurant idea. So he just traced my signature from my driver's license and filled out the form himself. I stood there in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, trying to process what I was hearing. He'd forged my signature on a legal document for $45,000, and he was telling me this like it was a reasonable thing to do. I asked him if he understood that what he did was illegal. He got defensive immediately, said it wasn't a big deal, that he was going to pay it back, that I was overreacting. I told him a debt collector had just contacted me, which meant he clearly wasn't paying it back. He said he'd hit a rough patch, but he'd figure it out, and I needed to calm down because we were family. But that wasn't even the worst part. I asked him how long he'd defaulted on the loan. He got quiet. Then he admitted he'd only made the first 3 months of payments before the restaurant failed, and he stopped paying altogether. That meant for the past 5 months, this debt had been sitting there, accruing interest and late fees, destroying my credit score, and he hadn't said a word to me about it. He'd let me walk around completely unaware that I was legally responsible for his failed business venture. I told him he needed to fix this immediately. He said he didn't have the money, that the whole point of closing the restaurant was that he couldn't afford it anymore. I asked what he expected me to do. He said he figured we could work something out. Maybe I could help him with the payments until he got back on his feet. He actually said that. He forged my signature, destroyed my credit, and then suggested I should pay off his debt for him. I hung up and called a lawyer that same day. The lawyer explained that what my brother did was identity theft and fraud, that I could file a police report and dispute the debt, but it would likely require pressing charges against him. I didn't hesitate. I filed the report and hired the lawyer to handle everything. I wasn't going to let a $45,000 fraudulent debt sit on my credit because my brother thought forging signatures was no big deal. That's when my family got involved. My mum called me crying, said I was tearing the family apart over money, that my brother made a mistake but he didn't deserve to have his life ruined over it. I tried to explain that he'd committed fraud, that what he did was a crime, not a mistake. She said I was being dramatic and that families help each other instead of calling lawyers and police. My dad sent me a long text about forgiveness and how blood is thicker than water. My aunt posted something on Facebook about people who value money over family, clearly directed at me even though she didn't use my name. Cousins I barely talked to were suddenly messaging me, asking if I really wanted to send my own brother to jail. The thing that got me was how everyone kept framing this as me being vindictive over money, as if the issue was that I didn't want to help my brother financially. But that wasn't it at all. If he'd asked me straight up for help with a loan, we could have had a conversation. I might have said no, I might have said yes with conditions, but it would have been my choice. He didn't give me a choice. He stole my identity, forged my signature, and legally bound me to a debt I never agreed to. And when he got caught, he expected me to just accept it and probably pay for it too. That's not a mistake. That's not asking for help. That's fraud. Things went from bad to unhinged. The legal process took 8 months. 8 months of back and forth with the bank, with credit agencies, with lawyers, 8 months of submitting handwriting analysis, proving I'd never authorized the loan, documenting every conversation with my brother. 8 months of my family telling me I was destroying my brother's future over money, as if he hadn't already destroyed his own future by committing fraud. During those 8 months, my brother tried every angle. First, he apologized and begged me to drop the charges. Then he got angry and accused me of being petty and vindictive. Then he tried to get other family members to pressure me. My mum offered to make payments on the loan if I just let it go. I told her that wasn't the point and that she should save her money because my brother was probably going to need a better lawyer. Eventually, the debt was removed from my name. The forensic analysis proved the signature was forged. The bank had to eat the loss because they'd failed to properly verify the guarantor, which honestly served them right. My brother got probation, community service, and a fraud conviction on his record. My family acted like I'd personally put him in prison. Never mind that he'd committed an actual crime. Never mind that he'd shown zero remorse until he faced consequences. Never mind that he'd been perfectly willing to let me suffer financial ruin to cover his own bad decisions. I was the villain in their story because I'd refused to be a victim in his. We don't speak anymore. None of them speak to me, actually. I'm not invited to family gatherings. My name doesn't come up in group chats. I've been effectively excommunicated for the crime of holding my brother accountable for fraud. And honestly, I'm okay with that. Because what I learned from this whole nightmare is that some people will excuse anything if it's done by someone they love. They'll call crime a mistake. They'll call fraud a misunderstanding. They'll rewrite reality to avoid confronting the fact that their son, their brother, their nephew committed a serious crime and felt entitled to do it. My brother didn't just forge my signature. He demonstrated that he thought his needs were more important than my consent, my financial security, or my trust. And when he got caught, he didn't take responsibility. He played the victim and let my family attack me for refusing to absorb the consequences of his actions. That's not family. That's not love. That's just people who will sacrifice you to protect someone else's comfort. I still check my credit report obsessively now. I froze my credit with all 3 bureaus. I keep my important documents locked up. I don't trust easily anymore, especially not with family. And maybe that's sad, but it's also realistic. Some people will absolutely forge your signature and then act confused when you won't just let it slide. And sometimes the people who should support you will side with the person who wronged you, because accountability is uncomfortable and denial is easier. I filed the police report, I fought the case, and I won. My credit is clean, the debt is gone, and I don't owe my brother or anyone else an apology for refusing to be defrauded. That's not heartless. That's called having boundaries. Forged signatures are one thing, but what happens when the betrayal comes with a promotion announcement? My director sent out a calendar invite for an all-hands meeting with the subject line, "Exciting news." No other context, just that. The whole team was buzzing trying to figure out what it could be. New client, department restructure, bonus announcements. I had my suspicions, but I didn't want to get my hopes up. For the past 8 months, I'd been running 2 major initiatives that had completely transformed our department's performance. I'd led the rollout of a new client management system that cut response times in half. I'd personally brought in 3 new accounts that generated over $1 million in revenue, and I'd been mentoring junior team members, basically doing leadership work without the title or the pay. My director had pulled me aside a few months earlier and told me that a senior position was opening up, and I was the top candidate. She said it was basically confirmed, just needed final approval from upper management. She told me to keep it quiet until the official announcement, but that I should start thinking about who I'd want on my team. I'd been walking on air ever since, so when that meeting invite came through, I figured this was it. The official announcement, finally getting recognized for all the work I'd put in. We all filed into the conference room. My director stood at the front with this huge smile on her face. She started talking about how proud she was of the team's growth, how we'd exceeded every target this year, how exciting it was to see people stepping into leadership roles. Then she said, "We're thrilled to promote someone who's shown exceptional leadership this year." My heart started racing. I could feel people glancing at me. I tried to keep my expression neutral, professional, but inside I was already celebrating. She kept going. This person spearheaded our new client management system, bringing efficiency and innovation to everything they touched. They brought in significant new business and demonstrated the kind of forward thinking we value. Those were my projects, my initiatives, my exact accomplishments. She was describing me, word for word. I started to shift in my seat, getting ready to stand up when she called my name. A few colleagues were already smiling at me. One person started to clap. "Congratulations to Marcus." The room went silent for a split second. Then there was scattered, confused applause. I sat there frozen, my brain refusing to process what I'd just heard. Marcus? Marcus had joined the team 6 months ago. He was competent, sure, but he hadn't led any major projects. He hadn't brought in new clients. He definitely hadn't built the client management system. I had done that before he even started. I looked over at Marcus, and he looked just as shocked as I felt. He glanced at me with this apologetic, uncomfortable expression, like he knew something was very wrong, but didn't know what to do about it. My director kept talking about Marcus's leadership presence and his strategic vision. None of it made sense. She was still describing my work, but crediting him for it. People in the room were looking between Marcus and me, clearly confused. A few of them knew exactly who had done those projects. The meeting ended with everyone awkwardly congratulating Marcus. I went back to my desk and sat there, staring at my computer screen, trying to figure out what had just happened. But that wasn't even the worst part. I gave it a few hours to cool down, then I asked my director if I could speak with her privately. She seemed surprised that I wanted to talk, which should have been my first red flag. We went into her office and I closed the door. "I'm confused about the promotion announcement," I said, keeping my voice as level as possible. "Those were my projects you described, the client management system, the new accounts, all of it. I thought we discussed that I was being promoted." She leaned back in her chair with this sympathetic expression that made my stomach turn. "I know you worked hard on those initiatives, and you should be really proud. But when it came down to the final decision, Marcus just has more leadership presence. He carries himself like a senior team member. You're incredibly valuable where you are, though. We really need you in your current role." "You told me the promotion was basically confirmed," I said. "You told me to start thinking about my team." "I said it was a possibility," she corrected. "I never promised anything definite. These decisions are always subject to change based on business needs." I pulled out my phone and opened my email. I'd saved every message she'd sent me about the promotion. I read one out loud. "Based on your performance this quarter, the senior role is yours pending final approval. Start thinking strategically about team composition." She barely glanced at the screen. "That's not a promise. That's me being encouraging and optimistic. You're reading too much into casual conversations." The gaslighting was so blatant it was almost impressive. She was rewriting our entire months-long conversation about my promotion, acting like I'd made it all up in my head. "So the announcement today," I said slowly, "where you described my exact projects and accomplishments, that was what, a coincidence?" "Those projects were team efforts," she said. "Marcus contributed significantly to their success, even if he came in partway through. And frankly, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You're being defensive and territorial instead of celebrating a teammate's success. That's not leadership behavior." There it was. She'd turned my legitimate confusion and frustration into a character flaw. I was the problem for questioning why someone else got promoted for work I'd done. I left her office understanding exactly what had happened. The announcement wasn't a mistake. It was designed to make it look like a fair, merit-based decision. By listing my accomplishments publicly, she could point to them as reasons for Marcus's promotion. Anyone who questioned it could be told those were team projects and that Marcus had leadership presence, whatever that meant. And she dangled the promotion in front of me for months, probably to keep me motivated and working hard, with no real intention of actually giving it to me. That's when everything unraveled. I started keeping detailed records of everything, every project I led, every client I brought in, every metric I improved. I documented all my communication with my director about the promotion. I quietly reached out to a few trusted colleagues and confirmed that yes, they'd also thought the announcement was going to be about me, based on the project descriptions. I also started job hunting. I updated my LinkedIn, reached out to recruiters, and had coffee with former colleagues at other companies. And I made a list of the clients I had personal relationships with, clients who'd probably follow me if I left. 3 months later, I accepted a position at a competitor. Better title, better pay, better everything. When I gave my notice, my director seemed genuinely shocked. "I thought you were happy here," she said. "You thought wrong. Is this about the promotion? Because there will be other opportunities." "I'm sure there will be," I said, "for Marcus." Within a month of leaving, 2 of my major clients moved their business to my new company. They'd been working with me personally, not with the company, and when I reached out to let them know I'd moved, they decided to follow. That was another $500,000 in annual revenue that walked out the door with me. My old director called me furious. She said I'd violated non-compete agreements and stolen clients. I reminded her that I'd never signed a non-compete, and that clients are allowed to choose who they work with. If they preferred working with me over her team, that was a business decision, not theft. Marcus lasted about 8 months in the senior role before he quietly stepped back down. Turns out leadership presence doesn't mean much when you don't actually know how to lead. The projects I'd built started falling apart without me there to maintain them. I heard through former colleagues that the department's metrics had dropped significantly. The whole experience taught me something important about corporate culture and how promotions actually work. Merit matters, but it's not the only thing that matters. Sometimes it's not even the main thing. Leadership presence, whatever that vague term means, can trump actual results, and being valuable in your current role can become a trap, because why would they promote someone who's already doing exactly what they need right where they are? My director didn't promote me because she needed me to keep doing the work I was doing. Promoting me would have created a gap she'd have to fill. Marcus was expendable from his current role, so he got moved up. And by describing my projects in the announcement, she could justify the decision to anyone who questioned it. It was calculated, it was manipulative, and it worked right up until I decided I was done playing along. I don't regret leaving. I don't regret taking those clients with me. And I definitely don't regret watching that whole system collapse after I removed myself from it. They wanted me to stay valuable in my current role. Well, they got what they wanted. I stayed exactly where I was, just at a different company. Corporate gaslighting is exhausting, but at least colleagues are supposed to be adults. Siblings, though? That's a different level of betrayal. My sister called me on a Tuesday afternoon, sounding stressed. She had a job interview the next morning, her car was in the shop, and she needed to get across town to make a good impression. Could she borrow mine? I didn't even hesitate. We'd had our differences over the years, but she was my sister. Of course she could borrow my car. I met her at my apartment that evening, handed over the keys, showed her where I kept the registration and insurance info, and told her to text me when she got home safe. She thanked me, seemed genuinely grateful, and drove off. I went back inside feeling good about helping out. That night she didn't text. I sent her a message around 9 asking if everything was okay. No response. I called at 10, straight to voicemail. By 11 I was getting worried, but I told myself she probably just forgot to charge her phone or went to bed early to be fresh for the interview. Then at midnight someone knocked on my door. Heavy, authoritative knocking that immediately made my stomach drop. I looked through the peephole and saw 2 police officers standing in the hallway. I opened the door, and before I could even ask what was wrong, one of them asked if I owned a specific make and model of vehicle with a specific license plate number. My car. I said yes, that's my car. He asked where it was. I explained my sister had borrowed it for a job interview. The other officer exchanged a look with his partner that I couldn't read. Then he told me my car had been involved in a hit and run earlier that evening. Significant damage to a parked vehicle, and the driver had fled the scene. A witness had gotten my plate number. I felt like the ground was disappearing beneath me. My sister had been in an accident. Was she okay? Why hadn't she called me? But that wasn't even the worst part. The officer said there was a complication. The vehicle had been reported stolen. A family member had called it in, saying they'd seen the car being driven recklessly and were concerned because I would never drive that way. They suggested maybe someone had taken the car without permission. I just stared at him. Reported stolen by a family member. I explained again that I'd given my sister explicit permission to borrow the car. I'd handed her the keys myself. There was no theft. The officer asked if I had any proof of that, and I pulled out my phone and showed him our text conversation, where she'd asked to borrow it and I'd said yes. They asked for my sister's contact information. I gave them her number and address. They said they'd be in touch and left. I spent the rest of the night trying to reach my sister, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. She still wasn't answering. The next morning, I got a call from a detective. He said they'd spoken with my sister and with my mother, and that the situation was more complicated than it initially appeared. My sister had admitted to the accident. She'd panicked after hitting the parked car, didn't know what to do, and called our mom for advice. And my mom had told her to report the car stolen, to claim that I must have left the keys somewhere accessible and someone must have taken it, to suggest that I was irresponsible with my vehicle and this was somehow my fault. They'd tried to frame me. My own mother and sister had coordinated a plan to make me look like either a liar or an idiot who left my car vulnerable to theft, all to avoid my sister taking responsibility for an accident. The level of calculation involved was staggering. This wasn't a panic decision made in the moment. My mum had thought it through, come up with a strategy, and convinced my sister to go along with it. They'd weaponized a police report against me. The detective said the text messages I'd shown the officers the night before had already proven I'd given permission. My sister's story about the car being stolen had immediately fallen apart, but they'd stuck with it anyway, at least initially, until confronted with evidence. He told me my sister was being charged with leaving the scene of an accident and filing a false police report. Both were serious offences, the false report charge especially, since she'd knowingly lied to law enforcement to try to shift blame onto me. I asked if my mum would face any charges for her role in this. He said it was complicated, but they were looking into whether she could be charged with conspiracy or obstruction. I never found out if anything came of that. Honestly, I stopped following up because I just wanted the whole thing to be over. My car had about $4,000 in damage. The insurance situation was a nightmare because my sister had been driving with permission, but had then committed a crime with the vehicle. I ended up having to get a lawyer involved just to sort out the claims process. And here's where it gets absurd. My mum called me a week later, not to apologize, not to take any responsibility for what she'd done. She called to tell me I was being cruel and vindictive by not protecting family. She said my sister was facing criminal charges and I could make it all go away by just telling the police it was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. She wanted me to lie to the police, to claim that actually maybe I hadn't given clear permission. Maybe my sister had misunderstood. Maybe the whole stolen car report was just confusion and not a deliberate attempt to frame me for a hit and run. I told her no. I told her what she'd done was unforgivable, that she'd tried to destroy my reputation and possibly get me charged with a crime to protect my sister from the consequences of an accident that would have been bad but manageable if they'd just been honest about it from the start. She started crying, saying I was tearing the family apart. That family is supposed to stick together, that I was choosing strangers and the legal system over my own blood. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. I hung up on her. I blocked her number. I blocked my sister's number. I sent a message to the rest of my family explaining what had happened, what they'd tried to do, and that I was going no contact with both of them. Some relatives tried to play peacemaker, suggesting family therapy or mediation. I shut that down immediately. There's no mediating attempted fraud. There's no therapy that fixes someone trying to get you arrested to cover their own mistakes. My sister eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges. She got probation, community service, and a permanent record. My mum never faced any legal consequences as far as I know, and they both seem to genuinely believe I was the villain in this story for not bailing them out. The thing that still gets me is how preventable all of this was. If my sister had just stayed at the scene, called me, told me what happened, we could have handled it together. Insurance would have covered the damage to the other car. She might have gotten a ticket, maybe a fine, but nothing career-ending. Nothing that would have resulted in criminal charges. Instead, she panicked, called our mum, and our mum's first instinct was to throw me under the bus, not to help her daughter take responsibility, not to coach her through a difficult situation, honestly, but to construct a lie that would make me the fool guy. That's what hurt the most. Not the inconvenience of dealing with police and insurance, not even the damage to my car. It was knowing that when faced with a crisis, my own mother's solution was to sacrifice me. That in her hierarchy of priorities, protecting my sister from consequences ranked higher than protecting me from being falsely accused of a crime. I think about what would have happened if I hadn't had those text messages, if our entire conversation about borrowing the car had been verbal. The police might have actually believed the theft story. I could have been charged. My life could have been derailed because my mom decided her version of protecting family meant destroying me. Some people say blood is thicker than water, and you have to forgive family no matter what. Those people have never had family try to frame them for a crime. There are limits. There are lines that, once crossed, you can't come back from. I haven't spoken to my sister or my mother in over a year now. I've blocked them on everything, changed my phone number, made it clear to mutual family members that I don't want updates about them, and I don't want them to have updates about me. My mum apparently tells people I abandoned the family over a misunderstanding, that I'm holding a grudge over nothing. She's rewritten the whole story in her head to make herself the victim. My sister, from what I've heard, mostly just stays quiet about it. I think part of her knows how badly she messed up, but she's too proud or too embarrassed to actually reach out and apologize. Not that I'd want an apology at this point. Some betrayals are unforgivable. When someone shows you they're willing to use the criminal justice system as a weapon against you to avoid taking responsibility for their own actions, you believe them, and you protect yourself by cutting them out completely. I have a new car now, better locks, and a very short list of people who are allowed to borrow anything from me. Trust, once shattered like that, doesn't really come back. When your own family weaponizes the police against you, it's hard to imagine trusting anyone again. But the next story proves that sometimes the people you feed are the ones who bite hardest. I'd volunteered to host Thanksgiving that year because my parents were getting older and I thought it would be nice to take some pressure off them. Plus, I had the space. I just bought a house with a big dining room that could actually fit the whole extended family, and I was kind of excited to show it off and do the whole hosting thing. 20 people RSVP'd. Aunts, uncles, cousins, my parents, my siblings, even my grandparents. I spent the entire week leading up to Thanksgiving preparing. I deep cleaned the entire house. I planned out a menu, prepped ingredients, timed everything so it would all be ready at the same time. I bought extra chairs, rented table extensions, set up a kids' table in the living room. I'm talking full Martha Stewart energy. The day of, I was up at 6 in the morning getting the turkey in the oven. I made 3 kinds of stuffing because different people had different preferences. I did mashed potatoes, sweet potato casserole, green bean almondine, cranberry sauce from scratch, rolls, gravy, the works. I even made 2 pies and a cheesecake because my aunt was diabetic and needed a sugar-free option. Everyone started arriving around 2. The house smelled amazing. People were complimenting the decorations, the table setup, how nice everything looked. My mum gave me a hug and said she was proud of me for pulling this together. I felt good, like I'd actually managed to create this perfect family holiday moment. Dinner went great. Everyone ate, people went back for seconds. The food turned out exactly how I wanted it to. Conversations were flowing, people were laughing. My grandpa told his usual stories. My cousin's kids were being relatively well behaved. It genuinely felt like a successful Thanksgiving. Then we moved on to dessert. I'd set up a coffee station and put out the pies and cheesecake. People were settling back into their seats with their plates when my Aunt Linda stood up. She tapped her wine glass with a fork like she was about to make a toast. "Before we all leave tonight," she said, "I think we need to address something important." The room got quiet. I figured she was going to thank me for hosting or something. Instead, she pulled out a piece of paper from her purse, actual notes, and my stomach immediately dropped because I knew this wasn't going to be good. She started talking about how the family had been concerned about me for a while now, how they'd noticed some behaviors that were troubling, and how they'd decided that tonight, with everyone together, would be a good time to have an honest conversation about it. I just sat there, frozen, as she started listing things. She said I'd become self-centered since buying my house, that I talked about my job too much and made other people feel inferior, that I'd stopped being humble and started acting like I was better than everyone else. Then my cousin Jason jumped in. He said that every time we talked, I found a way to brag about my career, or my salary, or some achievement, that it was exhausting to be around me because I always had to one-up everyone else's stories. My Uncle Rick said I didn't visit my grandparents enough, that I'd moved an hour away and barely made an effort to see them, and that it hurt them even though they didn't say anything. My sister, my own sister, said I'd been distant ever since I moved, that I didn't call as much, didn't come to family events unless it was a major holiday, and that it felt like I thought I was too good for them now that I had my fancy house and my career. One by one, different family members took turns. They each had specific examples ready. Times I'd said something that came across as arrogant, visits I'd missed, phone calls I hadn't returned. It was like they'd compiled a comprehensive list of every way I'd apparently failed as a family member. And the whole time, I'm sitting at the head of my own dining room table, in the house I'd just spent a week preparing to welcome them into, listening to them publicly shame me during the dinner I'd cooked for them. But that wasn't even the worst part. I realized as this went on that this had been planned, coordinated. They hadn't just spontaneously decided to do this. My aunt had notes. Multiple people had prepared talking points. They'd clearly discussed this beforehand, assigned who would say what, and decided that my Thanksgiving dinner would be the perfect venue for this intervention. After about 30 minutes of this, I finally found my voice. I said, "I think you all need to leave." My aunt looked shocked. "We're not done yet. We're trying to help you." "I don't care. This is my house, and I'm asking you to leave." My Uncle Rick scoffed. "We drove 2 hours to get here. You're really going to kick us out because you can't handle a little honest feedback? This isn't feedback. This is ambush. And yes, I'm asking you to leave. Now." Nobody moved. They all just sat there, looking at each other like they were waiting to see who would blink first. My aunt actually said, "We have a right to finish this conversation. We're family." The entitlement was absolutely stunning. They'd used my hospitality, eaten my food, waited until I'd put in all the work, and then turned my own dinner party into a coordinated attack. And now they were refusing to leave because they felt entitled to finish humiliating me in my own home. I pulled out my phone and started dialing. My cousin asked what I was doing. I said, "I asked you to leave. You refused. So I'm calling the police for trespassing." That got them moving. Suddenly people were standing up, grabbing their coats, acting offended that I'd escalated things. My mom tried to mediate, saying, "Maybe we could all just calm down and talk this through." I told her that there was nothing to talk through, that they'd ambushed me in my own home and I wanted them gone. They filtered out, but not quietly. My aunt said I was proving their point about being selfish. My uncle muttered something about me being ungrateful. My sister said I was overreacting and that they were just trying to help. Even my dad, on his way out, said I should think about what they'd said instead of just getting defensive. By 7 o'clock, my house was empty. There were half-eaten plates of pie on the table, coffee getting cold in cups, chairs pushed back at odd angles. I stood in my kitchen looking at the disaster of dishes and leftovers and just started crying. Because the worst part wasn't even the intervention itself, it was the planning that had gone into it. Somewhere in some group chat I wasn't part of, my family had discussed this. They'd agreed that I needed to be taken down a peg. They'd coordinated who would say what. They'd decided that the best time to do it would be at the dinner I was hosting, after I'd spent days cooking for them. That's when everything unraveled. I found out later through my mum that there actually was a family group chat. It had been created specifically to plan this intervention. My aunt had started it about a month before Thanksgiving. They'd been discussing my so-called issues for weeks, building their case, deciding how to approach it, and they'd deliberately chosen my dinner as the venue because they knew I'd feel pressured to hear them out in my own home with everyone there. The sheer calculation of it made me sick. This wasn't a spontaneous moment where people spoke their truth. This was a planned ambush disguised as family concern, and they'd used my hospitality and my effort as the weapon to deliver it. I didn't host Thanksgiving the next year, or any year after that. I stopped volunteering to host anything actually. Birthday parties, Christmas dinners, Easter brunch, nothing. Because I learned that opening your home to people doesn't guarantee they'll respect it. Sometimes they'll use it as an opportunity to corner you. My relationship with my extended family never really recovered. We're polite at other people's events, but there's a distance now that wasn't there before. My aunt acts like I'm the one who ruined Thanksgiving by kicking everyone out. My uncle still thinks I overreacted. My sister eventually apologized, but it was one of those apologies where she said she was sorry I felt hurt, not sorry for what she'd actually done. The thing is, maybe some of what they said had a grain of truth to it. Maybe I did talk about my job too much sometimes. Maybe I could have visited my grandparents more, but the way they chose to address it, the ambush, the coordination, the public shaming in my own home, that's what made it unforgivable. If someone had pulled me aside privately and said, "Hey, I think you've been a little distant lately. Is everything okay?" I would have listened, I would have had a conversation. But that's not what they wanted. They wanted to humiliate me. They wanted to take me down in front of the whole family, and they used my own generosity as the platform to do it. I still cook Thanksgiving dinner every year, but now it's just for me, or maybe a couple of close friends, people who wouldn't use my dining room table as a stage for my public trial. People who understand that honest feedback doesn't require an audience and coordinated notes. Some family dynamics are toxic even when they're dressed up as concern. And sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is stop providing the venue for your own ambush. Public humiliation at your own dinner table is brutal, but at least it's honest. The next workplace betrayal came disguised as opportunity. I was so excited when I got the job offer. The salary was exactly what I'd been hoping for, 75,000, and the benefits were solid. But the real selling point was the flexible remote work policy. The recruiter had emphasized it multiple times during the interview process. She said the company understood that people do their best work when they have flexibility, that they trusted their employees to manage their own schedules, and that as long as the work got done, location didn't matter. My offer letter spelled it out clearly: remote work with the option to come into the office as needed for collaboration or meetings. I'd negotiated that specifically because I'd just bought a house about an hour outside the city, in an area where I could actually afford something decent. Commuting 5 days a week wasn't feasible long term, and I'd made that clear from the beginning. The first 6 months were great. I worked from home most days, came into the office maybe once a week for team meetings, and my performance reviews were excellent. My manager praised my productivity, my communication, my ability to work independently. I was hitting every deadline, exceeding most of my targets, and genuinely enjoying the job. Then the company got acquired. New leadership came in, and within a month, everything changed. They called an all-staff meeting and announced a return to office policy. Mandatory 5 days a week, in office, starting in 2 weeks. No exceptions. They framed it as building culture and fostering collaboration, all the usual corporate buzzwords that really just mean we don't trust you to work from home. I wasn't the only person thrown by this. Half the team had been hired with remote work agreements, but most people just nodded along, probably already planning their resignations. I decided to speak up. I sent an email to my manager reminding her that my offer letter explicitly stated flexible remote work. I wasn't being combative, I was just pointing out that this new policy contradicted the terms I'd been hired under. I asked if there could be exceptions for people with contractual remote work arrangements. Her response was brief: company needs have changed. We're all expected to adapt. I forwarded her my actual offer letter, the one from HR with the company letterhead and the CEO's signature, highlighting the section about remote work. I said I was happy to be flexible and come in more often than I had been, but that a full 5-day requirement wasn't what I'd agreed to. That's when things got weird. Suddenly, I wasn't a team player. In our next one-on-one, my manager said she was concerned about my attitude. She said the company was going through changes and everyone needed to be supportive, not resistant. I tried to explain that I wasn't being resistant. I was asking for the terms of my employment to be honored. She said I was being inflexible and that it didn't reflect well on me. The next week, she started documenting everything. And I mean everything. I took my lunch break at 12:15 instead of noon one day because I was finishing up a client call. She sent me an email noting that core hours were 9 to 5 and that lunch was scheduled for noon to 1. I asked a clarifying question during a team meeting because I didn't understand a new process we were implementing. She pulled me aside afterward and said I'd been disruptive and should save questions for later. There was an optional happy hour on a Friday afternoon. I didn't go because I had plans, and also because it was optional. Monday morning, she mentioned in our one-on-one that she'd noticed my absence and that it raised concerns about culture fit. She actually said that. Missing an optional after-work event was evidence that I didn't fit the culture. Within 3 weeks of pushing back on the remote work policy, I went from being a top performer to being put on a performance improvement plan. The PIP cited vague issues like attitude problems, resistance to change, and lack of team engagement. None of it was based on my actual work, which was still excellent. It was all behavioral nonsense they'd manufactured after I'd asked them to honor my contract. I scheduled a meeting with HR, thinking maybe they could help clear this up. The HR rep listened to my concerns, looked at my offer letter, and then said something that made my blood run cold. It sounds like you've become difficult to work with since you raised the remote work issue. Maybe this role isn't the right fit anymore. They weren't even trying to hide it. I'd asked for what I was promised, and their response was to systematically build a case to fire me. But that wasn't even the worst part. I started talking to other employees who'd been hired with remote work agreements. Turns out this was happening to all of them. Anyone who pushed back on the return to office mandate was suddenly underperforming, suddenly difficult, suddenly not a culture fit. The company was forcing people to either relocate closer to the office, accept a massive lifestyle change they hadn't signed up for, or quit. One guy had moved across the country specifically because the job was remote. He had a wife and 2 kids settled into schools and a community. Now he was being told to uproot his entire family or lose his job. A woman on another team was a caregiver for her elderly parent and had taken the job specifically because remote work made that possible. She was being told her personal circumstances weren't the company's problem. It was a coordinated effort to get rid of anyone who'd been promised something the new management didn't want to honor, and they were doing it in a way that made it look like performance issues instead of breach of contract. I contacted an employment lawyer. I brought my offer letter, the emails with my manager, the documentation of my sudden decline from top performer to PIP candidate, and everything I'd heard from other employees in similar situations. The lawyer's eyes lit up. She said this was textbook constructive dismissal and potentially fraud in the inducement. The company had made specific promises to get people to accept jobs, then systematically forced them out when they tried to hold the company to those promises. She started reaching out to other affected employees. Within 2 months, we had enough people for a class action lawsuit. Dozens of employees who'd been hired with remote work agreements, then pushed out when new management decided that policy was inconvenient. I left the company before they could fire me. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction, and my lawyer said it would be better for the lawsuit if I resigned rather than being terminated. My last day was surreal. My manager acted like we were parting on good terms, said she hoped I found something that was a better fit, all very professional and fake. The lawsuit took about 18 months to resolve. The company fought it initially, claimed that remote work had always been subject to change based on business needs, tried to argue that our offer letters weren't binding contracts, but their own internal emails sank them. We had communications from executives acknowledging that they were using performance management to push out employees who wouldn't comply with the new office policy. They settled. The terms were confidential, but I can say it was enough to make a real difference. I used my portion as a down payment on my mortgage, which felt appropriate since the house I'd bought specifically because I had a remote job had become the center of this whole mess. Looking back, the thing that still gets me is how quickly they turned on me. One day, I was a valued employee. The next day, because I asked them to honor the terms they'd offered me, I was difficult and not a team player. They manufactured an entire performance narrative in a matter of weeks, all because I wouldn't just roll over and accept that promises don't matter. The experience taught me to read contracts carefully and to understand that companies will absolutely try to change the terms after you've already accepted. And if you push back, they'll make you the problem. They'll document everything you do, twist normal workplace behavior into performance issues, and create a paper trail that justifies whatever they want to do. But it also taught me that sometimes you have to fight back, and that when enough people fight back together, companies can't just rewrite reality to suit their needs. I found another job within a few months, fully remote, with a contract that explicitly states the remote work policy can't be changed without my written consent. I learned my lesson, and that settlement money, best mortgage down payment I ever made. At least I got a legal win eventually. But the next person's romantic partner had plans that didn't include them at all. My partner and I had been together for 4 years. We talked about the future in vague, comfortable terms. Someday we'd get a place with a yard. Eventually we'd travel more. Maybe kids down the line, maybe not. The kind of open-ended conversations couples have when they're happy, but not in a rush to change anything. Then, about 3 months ago, things started feeling off. They were suddenly very protective of their phone, angling it away when I was nearby. They had a lot of evening meetings, which was weird because their job had always been pretty standard 9 to 5. When I'd ask about their day, they'd be vague, deflecting with generic answers about projects and deadlines. I'm not proud to admit this, but I started wondering if they were cheating. The secretiveness, the distance, the weird schedule, it all pointed in that direction. I was preparing myself for a difficult conversation, maybe even the end of the relationship. Then one evening, they came home with this huge smile on their face. They said they had exciting news and we needed to talk. My stomach dropped. This was it, the conversation I'd been dreading. They sat me down on the couch, practically vibrating with excitement. "I've been working on something big," they said. "I didn't want to tell you until everything was finalized because I wanted it to be a surprise." I braced myself. "I got a job offer in Seattle, an amazing opportunity, way better than what I'm doing now, and I've been planning everything so we can make the move as smooth as possible. I found us an apartment. It's perfect, right in a great neighborhood. I've already scheduled movers for next month. Aren't you excited?" I just sat there, trying to process what I was hearing. Seattle, an apartment, movers, next month. "You accepted a job in Seattle?" I said slowly. "Yes, the salary is incredible, and the position is exactly what I've been working toward. This is huge for my career." "And you found us an apartment without me seeing it?" "I did a virtual tour. Trust me, you're going to love it. It has this amazing kitchen, and the building has a rooftop deck." "And you scheduled movers for next month?" "I know it's fast, but the job starts in 6 weeks and we need time to get settled." I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. They were describing our entire future, completely planned out, and I'd had zero input, zero discussion, zero choice. "When exactly were you planning to ask if I wanted to move to Seattle?" I asked. They looked confused by the question. "I mean, I'm telling you now. This is the asking. This isn't asking, this is telling. You've already accepted the job. You've already signed a lease. You've already scheduled movers. Where in any of that was I supposed to have a say?" "I figured you'd be excited," they said, and they genuinely seemed baffled by my reaction. "This is an amazing opportunity for us. For me, I mean, but for us too. You can find a new job there." That's when it really hit me. They'd planned our entire future around their career advancement, without once considering that I might have my own life, my own career, my own reasons for wanting to stay. But that wasn't even the worst part. I told them I wasn't moving. I had a job I loved, a career I'd built over 6 years. My family lived 20 minutes away. My best friends were here. My entire life was here. I couldn't just pack up and leave because they'd decided that's what we were doing. They stared at me like I'd just spoken a foreign language. "But I've already signed the lease." "Then you shouldn't have signed a lease without talking to me first. I thought you'd be supportive. This is my dream job." "You're really going to make me choose between you and my career?" The audacity of that statement was genuinely breathtaking. They'd made the choice already. They'd chosen their career over our relationship the moment they accepted that job without consulting me. And now they were trying to frame my refusal to uproot my entire life as me being unsupportive. "You didn't give me a choice," I said. "You made a unilateral decision about both of our futures and expected me to just go along with it." "I thought we were a team," they said, and I could hear the anger creeping into their voice. Teams make sacrifices for each other. Teams also communicate with each other. They make decisions together. They don't plan someone else's life without asking them first. We went back and forth for hours. They kept trying to convince me that moving was the logical choice, that I was being stubborn and selfish, that relationships required compromise. I kept pointing out that there was no compromise happening here. They'd already made every decision. The only thing they were asking me to do was comply. They pulled out all the arguments. Long distance could work temporarily, while I figured out my own job situation in Seattle. My career wasn't as important as theirs because they made more money. My friends and family would understand because this was a huge opportunity. Every argument boiled down to the same thing. Their priorities mattered, mine didn't. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. I thought maybe after that first conversation, after they'd had time to think about it, they'd realize how messed up this whole situation was. Maybe they'd try to find a compromise, ask their new employer for a delayed start date so we could actually discuss this properly, or at least acknowledge that they'd handled this terribly. Instead, they doubled down. They started talking about the move like it was definitely happening, and I was just being difficult about the details. They'd mention things about the new apartment, about Seattle, about their new job, always with this assumption that I'd eventually come around. When I continued to say I wasn't moving, they got mean, started making comments about how I lacked ambition, how I was too comfortable in my little bubble, how I was holding them back, said that if I really loved them, I'd want them to succeed even if it meant personal sacrifice. I asked them point blank, if the situation were reversed, if I'd gotten a dream job offer in another state, would they have moved without question? They hesitated, and I saw the answer in their face before they even spoke. No, they wouldn't have, but they thought I should, and they couldn't see the double standard in that. 3 weeks before their scheduled move date, I told them we needed to make a decision about the relationship. Either they stayed and we worked through this together, or they moved and we broke up. I wasn't doing long distance with someone who'd shown such complete disregard for my input in major life decisions. They chose to move, and they acted like I was the one ending the relationship. Like my refusal to follow them across the country was me giving up on us. The mental gymnastics were truly Olympic level. They left, moved to Seattle, sent me a few texts in the first week about how great the apartment was, how I was missing out, how I'd regret not coming with them. I didn't respond. Then the text stopped. I heard through mutual friends that they'd been telling people I'd refused to support their career advancement, that I'd been too scared to leave my comfort zone, that the relationship ended because I wasn't willing to make sacrifices. They'd rewritten the entire story to make themselves the victim of my inflexibility. The thing is, I would have considered moving if they'd actually talked to me about it. If they'd said, hey, I'm thinking about applying for jobs in other cities. How would you feel about relocating? We could have had a real conversation, weighed the pros and cons together, made a decision as partners, but they didn't want a partner. They wanted someone who'd fall in line with whatever they decided. They wanted the appearance of a relationship without the actual work of considering another person's needs and wants. Looking back, I can see other moments where they'd made decisions for both of us without asking. Smaller things, committing us to plans with their friends without checking my schedule first, making purchases for our apartment without discussing them, booking vacations and then telling me about them. I'd let those slide because they seemed minor. I didn't realize they were part of a pattern. The Seattle job was just the biggest, most obvious example of how they viewed our relationship. I was an accessory to their life, not an equal participant in our shared life. I'm still in the same city, same job, same apartment. My life didn't fall apart without them. In fact, it got better, quieter, less stressful. I'd been walking on eggshells for longer than I'd realized, always adapting to what they wanted, what they needed, what they'd decided. Partnership requires actually partnering. It requires seeing your significant other as a person with their own goals and priorities, not just a supporting character in your story. They never learn that, and I'm glad I learned it before I wasted any more time trying to make it work with someone who fundamentally didn't see me as an equal. One-sided planning at least reveals itself, but the next favor I did, that one came with legal paperwork I never saw coming. My neighbor Tom seemed like a decent guy when he first moved in. We'd wave to each other, make small talk about the weather, the usual neighborly stuff. So when he knocked on my door one Saturday afternoon, asking if he could store some boxes in my garage for a few weeks while he renovated his basement, I didn't think twice about it. Sure, no problem. Being neighborly, right? He showed up the next day with maybe 10 or 12 boxes. I helped him carry them into my garage, stacked them neatly in the corner. They were taped up, labeled with things like winter clothes and old books. Nothing that looked particularly valuable or important. He thanked me, said he really appreciated it, and promised he'd have them out within a month. A month turned into 2 months, then 3, then 4. The boxes just sat there, taking up space in my garage. I'd occasionally see Tom outside and mention them, and he'd always say the same thing. Yeah, I need to grab those. I'll get to it this weekend. But the weekend would come and go, and the boxes would still be there. After 6 months, I was getting annoyed. I sent him a text. Hey, I really need my garage space back. Can you pick up your boxes this week? He responded with a thumbs up emoji and said he'd come by on Saturday. Saturday came and went. The boxes didn't move. I gave it another 2 weeks, then sent another text. This one was more direct. Tom, I've been more than patient, but I need the boxes gone. Please remove them by the end of this week. He read the message, didn't respond. By this point, I was done being nice. I sent one final text. If the boxes aren't picked up by Friday at 6 p.m., I'm going to assume you've abandoned them and I'll dispose of them myself. Consider this your final notice. Friday came. 6 o'clock passed. The boxes were still in my garage. I waited until Saturday morning, loaded them into my car, and drove them to a local charity donation center. I opened a couple to make sure there wasn't anything obviously valuable. Old clothes, some paperback books, a few random household items. Nothing that screamed family heirlooms. I dropped everything off, got a receipt for the donation, and went home feeling like I'd finally reclaimed my space. That Sunday, I found a letter taped to my front door. Not from Tom, from a law firm. I opened it and my stomach dropped. Tom was suing me for $15,000. The letter claimed that the boxes I donated contained irreplaceable family heirlooms, valuable collectibles, and sentimental items of significant worth. It demanded immediate payment, or they would proceed with legal action. There was a list of supposedly valuable items: antique clothing, first edition books, vintage electronics, even some jewelry. I read the letter 3 times, trying to process what I was looking at. This was the same guy who'd ignored my texts for months, who'd called the stuff old junk from the basement when he first brought it over. And now suddenly it was priceless family treasures worth 15 grand. The audacity was genuinely impressive in the worst possible way. I didn't panic. I went straight to my computer and pulled up every text exchange Tom and I had ever had. I screenshot the conversation where I'd warned him multiple times. I found the message where he'd initially asked to store some old stuff for a few weeks. I had documentation of every attempt I'd made to get him to pick up his belongings. Then I remembered something. I had a security camera in my garage. I'd installed it a year ago after some packages went missing in the neighborhood. I pulled the footage from the day Tom had dropped off the boxes. There he was, clear as day, loading boxes that were obviously light and unimportant. You could see him carrying them casually, no special care, tossing them into the corner like they were trash. At one point, he actually laughed and said something to me that the audio picked up. Just a bunch of crap I need to get rid of eventually. But that wasn't even the worst part. I called a lawyer, explained the situation, sent over all the documentation and the video footage. My lawyer looked at everything and actually laughed. He said this was one of the most transparent shakedown attempts he'd seen. Tom had clearly decided to try to extort money from me by inflating the value of items he'd abandoned. It was fraud, plain and simple. My lawyer drafted a response letter. It was beautiful. It included timestamps of every text message I'd sent. It referenced the security footage showing Tom treating the boxes like garbage. It quoted Tom's own words calling the items crap he needed to get rid of. And it ended with a polite but firm suggestion that Tom drop the lawsuit immediately or face a countersuit for attempted fraud and filing a frivolous claim. We sent the letter on a Wednesday. By Friday, I got a call from my lawyer. Tom had withdrawn the lawsuit. No explanation, no apology, just a notice that the case was being dropped. My lawyer said Tom's attorney had probably taken one look at our evidence and told him he had no case and was about to get himself in serious legal trouble. I never heard from Tom directly. No apology. No acknowledgement that he'd tried to shake me down for $15,000 over boxes of old clothes and paperback novels he'd abandoned in my garage for half a year. He just pretended it never happened. But I saw him a few weeks later outside getting his mail. He wouldn't make eye contact, just grabbed his letters and scurried back inside, like he was afraid I might say something. The neighborly waves stopped. The small talk ended. We became strangers living next door to each other, which honestly was fine by me. The whole experience taught me something important about doing favors. No good deed goes unpunished, especially when you're dealing with people who see kindness as weakness. I'd done Tom a favor by letting him use my garage space. I'd been patient for months longer than I should have been. And the moment I enforced a boundary and followed through on my warning, he tried to sue me for 15 grand. Some people genuinely believe that being accommodating means you're a pushover, that if you're nice once, you owe them forever. And when you stop accommodating them, when you finally say enough is enough, they retaliate. Tom didn't sue me because he actually lost anything valuable. He sued me because I'd stopped letting him take advantage of me. The lawsuit was punishment for enforcing a boundary, and if I hadn't had documentation, if I hadn't had that security footage, if I hadn't kept those text messages, he might have actually gotten away with it. That's the scary part. How many people get shaken down like this and just pay because they don't have proof? How many times does someone like Tom pull this stunt and succeed because the person they're targeting doesn't want the hassle of fighting back? I kept every piece of documentation from that situation. The texts, the lawyer letters, the donation receipt, the security footage, all of it. I filed it away in case Tom ever tried anything again. He never did. But I learned to document everything now. Every favor, every agreement, every casual arrangement with neighbors or acquaintances, because people will absolutely try to rewrite history when it benefits them. I also learned that being neighborly has limits. I'm still polite to people around me, but I don't do open-ended favors anymore. Everything has a clear timeline and clear terms, and if someone can't respect those terms, they don't get to take advantage of my space or my time. Tom eventually moved about a year later. I saw the moving truck and felt nothing but relief. New neighbors moved in, and I kept things cordial but distant. They asked once if they could borrow my lawnmower. I said no, but I could recommend where they could rent one. They seemed a little surprised, but they didn't push it. Sometimes people think you're being unfriendly or cold when you set boundaries. But boundaries aren't about being mean. They're about protecting yourself from people who will exploit generosity and then punish you when it runs out. Tom taught me that lesson the expensive way. Well, expensive for him, since he had to pay his lawyer for a lawsuit he had no chance of winning. For me, it just cost some garage space and a few hours of my time. A small price to pay for learning to never again let someone store their problems in my space without a paper trail. And that, everyone, is where our journey through Reddit chaos ends tonight. 15 stories of betrayal, manipulation, and the kind of audacity that makes you question humanity. But here's what I want you to remember. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're not just watching drama unfold, you're learning to spot the red flags before they're waving in your own life. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember, not every apology deserves acceptance, not every favor deserves a yes, and not every relationship deserves a second chance. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. Stay safe out there, set those boundaries, and I'll see you in the next one with even more stories that'll make you glad you're not living them. Until then, sleep well, if you can.